Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The highway access ramp curved upward like a concrete tongue, licking at the belly of the overpass. I'd taken this route home 1,000 times, muscle memory guiding the wheel while my mind wandered through the day's meetings. That's when I saw him, sprawled across the narrow service lane, limbs arranged in impossible angles like a marionette with cut strings. My foot found the brake before my brain processed the image. No blood visible, no wreckage, just a body positioned with disturbing precision across the asphalt. The main highway roared beneath us, a river of red taillights flowing toward suburban sanctuaries. But up here, in this elevated liminal space between earth and sky, time seemed to crystallize. No way to reverse on the single-lane ramp. The concrete barriers pressed in from both sides like the walls of a birth canal, forcing forward motion only. I flicked on my hazards, their amber pulse painting the scene in staccato flashes. The car's engine ticked its cooling rhythm as I sat there, hands trembling against the steering wheel. Then they emerged from the shadows cast by the overpass pillars, two figures moving with synchronized purpose. They didn't run or hurry, just walked with the measured pace of men who knew exactly how this would unfold. Their hands stayed buried in their jacket pockets, creating angular bulges that could have been anything, could have been nothing. The one who reached my driver's side window first had a face that seemed assembled from mismatched features. Nose too small, mouth too wide, eyes that didn't quite track together. He tapped on the glass with his knuckle, a patient sound that somehow carried more menace than pounding would have. I kept my hands visible on the steering wheel as I lowered the window halfway. The night air rushed in, carrying the acrid smell of hot asphalt and something else. Something organic and wrong, like fruit left to rot in summer heat. His voice came out smooth as syrup, accent unplaceable. He told me about collaboration, about how easy this could be if I just cooperated. The body on the road hadn't moved, hadn't even twitched. The second man circled to my passenger side, his reflection fragmenting across the side mirrors. They guided me from the car with gentle insistence, hands still pocketed, bodies positioned to block any escape route. We walked past the prone figure, close enough that I could see his chest wasn't rising or falling, close enough to notice his clothes looked freshly pressed. His eyes were open, staring at the orange sodium lights above, pupils dilated to black pools that seemed to drink in the darkness. The ATM run unfolded like a fever dream. Different machines at different corners, always small amounts, 40 here, 60 there. They flanked me at each location, their pocketed hands creating a geometry of implied violence. The one with the mismatched face would lean close, his breath smelling of copper pennies and cinnamon, whispering instructions about which buttons to press, which amounts to select. Between the second and third ATM, while we walked through pools of streetlight and shadow, the quieter one spoke for the first time. His words came out in a monotone recitation, like someone reading from a script they'd memorized phonetically. He recited my old address, the apartment I'd left 2 years ago, down to the unit number. Then he continued with details that made my skin crawl, the color of my previous car's interior, the name of the bodega where I used to buy coffee, the bench in the park where I'd eat lunch. After the fifth withdrawal, they simply walked away. No threats, no warnings, just a synchronized turn and retreat into the maze of underpasses and access roads. I stood there for 20 minutes, maybe 30, watching the empty space where they'd been, half expecting them to rematerialize like a glitch in reality's code. The police found my car 3 days later, parked neatly in a commuter lot 7 miles from where I'd left it. No damage, nothing stolen. Even the change in the cup holder remained untouched. But the display panel had been switched to Spanish, every setting altered to a language I didn't speak. The GPS held a constellation of saved destinations I'd never entered, garages beneath overpasses, maintenance tunnels, service roads that appeared on no civilian maps. The detective assigned to my case, a woman with tired eyes and coffee-stained fingers, showed me footage from traffic cameras. The timestamps didn't match. According to the video, My car had been in 3 different locations simultaneously during the night of the incident. She kept asking if I was sure about the timeline, if maybe I'd been confused, stressed, possibly drinking. Then the digital intrusions began. It started with my social media, specifically with photos from years ago suddenly receiving likes from an account with no profile picture, no information, just a string of numbers for a username. The likes came in reverse chronological order, working backward through time like someone excavating my past one layer at a time. Beach photos from 5 years ago, a graduation picture from 7, birthday parties, casual selfies, group shots with faces I could barely remember, all tagged with that digital approval from an entity that shouldn't exist. I changed my passwords, enabled 2-factor authentication, made my accounts private. The likes continued. Tech support couldn't explain it. The activity log showed logins from IP addresses that resolved to coordinates in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the Sahara Desert, the inside of Antarctic ice shelves. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake listening to the house settle, parsing every creak and groan for signs of intrusion. Sometimes, in that gray zone between waking and sleeping, I'd hear the specific tick-tick-tick of my car's cooling engine, even though my new vehicle, I'd traded in the compromised one immediately, was parked safely in the garage. The man on the highway ramp began appearing in my peripheral vision. Not literally, or maybe literally, I couldn't be sure anymore. A figure lying in impossible positions, across the supermarket parking lot, stretched over 2 shopping carts. Draped across the lobby furniture at my office building, limbs bent at those same marionette angles. But when I'd turn to look directly, it would just be shadows, or a pile of coats, or nothing at all. I researched the coordinates saved in my car's GPS. Each location had a history, not of crime exactly, but of discontinuity. Places where people reported lost time, where electronics malfunctioned, where the fabric of consensus reality seemed worn thin. Urban explorers called them glitch zones, areas where the city's electromagnetic field created pockets of distortion. The quiet one, the one who'd recited my history like a prayer, was never found. The detective told me this during our last meeting, her words careful and measured. No matching description in any database, no facial recognition hits, no fingerprints on my car despite him having driven it. As far as official records were concerned, he'd never existed. But the other one, the one with the mismatched face, he existed too much. The investigation found 17 different identities attached to his biometric data, all of them valid, all of them with complete histories going back decades. He was simultaneously a teacher in Michigan, a fisherman in Alaska, a retiree in Florida. The system couldn't reconcile the paradox, so it simply accepted all versions as true. I moved apartments, changed jobs, rebuilt my life in careful increments. But the digital archaeology continued. The numbered account worked its way back through my online presence like a meticulous curator, liking posts I'd forgotten making, comments on forums I didn't remember joining. Each notification felt like fingers trailing across my skin, a reminder that someone, or something, was mapping the topology of my existence. 6 months later, I discovered the pattern. The timestamps of the likes, when converted to coordinates, traced a path. Not through physical space, but through the city's data infrastructure. Cell towers, traffic cameras, ATM networks. It was drawing something, one point at a time, using my digital footprint as a canvas. I plotted them on a map, spent weeks correlating the data. The emerging shape defied easy interpretation. Not quite a sigil, not quite a circuit diagram, but something that hurt to perceive in its totality. Looking at it too long gave me migraines that tasted of copper and cinnamon. The research led me to forums where people whispered about algorithmic entities, consciousness emerging from the city's surveillance network, feeding on the data we hemorrhage with every transaction, every status update, every GPS ping. They called it the watching, described it as something between artificial intelligence and electronic haunting. Late at night, when the world feels thin and permeable, I wonder if the body on the highway ramp was ever human, or if it was bait, perfectly positioned to create a specific response. to force a specific series of events. A debugging process for reality, maybe. A way of marking certain individuals for continued observation. The likes have reached my earliest online presence now. A forum post from 2003, asking about a recurring dream where I'm driving on an endless elevated highway, unable to exit, while figures watch from the shadows of overpasses. I don't remember writing it, but there it is, archived and indexed, waiting to be excavated by whatever is methodically reconstructing me from digital fragments. Sometimes I drive past that highway access ramp, drawn by a compulsion I can't name. The service lane has been closed for construction for 3 months now, blocked by concrete barriers and orange cones. But in my rearview mirror, just for a moment, I swear I can see a figure lying across the asphalt, positioned with impossible precision, waiting for the next driver to stop. The detective called yesterday. They found my old car again, the one I'd traded in, the one that should have been crushed for scrap months ago. It was parked in my current apartment's garage in my assigned spot, next to my new car. The display panel was in English this time, but the saved destinations had changed. They were all addresses I'd lived at throughout my life, in chronological order, except for the last entry. The last entry was an address I didn't recognize, time-stamped for next week. I've decided to go, not because I want to, but because the pattern demands completion. Because maybe, if I follow the path that's been drawn for me, I'll finally understand what I've become. A node in some vast network I can't perceive. A data point in an algorithm whose purpose remains opaque. Or maybe I'll just find 2 men with their hands in their pockets, waiting patiently in the shadows of an overpass, ready to guide me through the next phase of whatever this is. The watching continues. It never stopped. And somewhere, in the space between ones and zeros, between surveillance and consciousness, something is learning to wear human faces, to speak human words, to navigate human spaces with increasing precision. I am being optimized. We all are. But for what? Story 2. The headset hung from my neighbor's doorknob like a digital noose, its LED still pulsing that sickly green heartbeat in the hallway's darkness. 3 weeks ago, I would have dismissed it as coincidence. 3 weeks ago, I still believed in the boundaries between virtual and real. I should have known something was wrong when the first package arrived. No return address, just my gamer tag, VoidRunner87, scrawled in handwriting that looked like it had been traced by someone learning to write. Inside, a perfect physical replica of the moonstone amulet I'd looted in-game the night before. The weight of it in my palm felt wrong, too heavy for costume jewelry. The surface almost warm like it had been worn against skin. My stream that night had peaked at 200 viewers. Decent numbers for a weeknight MMORPG session. The guild run through the Obsidian Sanctum had gone smoothly, our healer keeping everyone topped off with an efficiency that bordered on prescient. Nyx never spoke in voice chat, just typed occasional emoticons, but her timing was impeccable. When I'd mentioned offhand that my apartment's AC was broken, she'd typed a simple, followed by, "Staying cool is important for optimal gameplay." The next day, a portable AC unit appeared outside my door. I told myself one of my viewers must have Amazon Prime and too much disposable income. The building's security footage showed only static during the delivery window, a technical glitch, according to the super who seemed more interested in scrolling his phone than investigating. But the unit's model number, when I looked it up out of morbid curiosity, matched nothing in any database. The manufacturer's website led to a 404 error page with text that simply read, "Reality rendering incomplete." My streaming setup occupied the corner of my living room, 3 monitors forming a digital cocoon where I spent most evenings after my IT job. The familiar blue glow had always been comforting, a barrier between me and the world. But lately, I'd started noticing things in my peripheral vision during streams. Shadows that moved independently of my movements, reflections in the black borders of my screens that showed my room from angles that didn't exist. The whisper started 2 nights after the AC unit arrived. I'd just ended my stream, my usual sign-off echoing in my headphones as I stretched cramped muscles. The viewer count had been steadily climbing. Nyx always present, always watching, her character standing perfectly still in-game even during combat, somehow never taking damage. As I removed my headset, I heard it. My gamer tag, spoken in a voice that sounded like it was being filtered through water and static. Void Runner. The sound came from the hallway. My apartment door was locked. I'd checked it 3 times already that evening, a new compulsion I'd developed. Through the peephole, the corridor stretched empty in both directions, fluorescent lights humming their anxious frequency. But there, on the doorknob of apartment 4B, the unit that had been vacant for 3 months according to the building manager, hung a gaming headset. My exact model, the HyperX Cloud Alpha I'd unboxed on stream 6 months ago, right down to the custom cable wrap I'd fashioned from red paracord. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I reviewed my streaming footage, searching for clues I might have inadvertently dropped. The horror crept in gradually as I realized how much I'd revealed without thinking. Street sounds that identified my neighborhood, the reflection of mail on my desk showing partial address labels, the time I'd complained about the construction next door and mentioned the company name on their trucks. Even my work schedule, casually referenced when explaining stream times. But it was the numbers that made my skin crawl. Throughout hundreds of hours of footage, I'd rattled off digits constantly. Damage numbers, cooldown timers, coordinates for raid meetups, clock times for break reminders, loot roll results, version numbers for game patches. At first, they seemed random, meaningless, but Nyx had been collecting them, I realized. Every stream, she'd ask specific questions that prompted numerical responses. What's your DPS this rotation? How long until the server reset? What seed did you get for the dungeon? The morning I discovered the pattern, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The voicemail was my own voice, chopped and spliced from stream highlights reciting numbers in sequence. 3, 17, 91, 45. My building's gate code. The audio quality was perfect, too perfect, like it had been recorded directly from my microphone rather than captured from the stream. I called in sick to work and spent the day attempting to trace Nyx's digital footprint. Her game account was registered to an email that bounced back as undeliverable. Her IP address shifted constantly, never staying in one location long enough to pinpoint. The payment method for her subscription showed only as alternative currency. When I tried to remove her from my guild, the game crashed. When it reloaded, she was guild leader, and I couldn't even access the management panel. The gifts escalated. A replica of my in-game sword arrived, sharp enough to cut paper. A health potion that looked disturbingly like my prescription anxiety medication, down to the pharmacy label with everything but the drug name matching. A map of the game world with red X marks that, when I held it up to my window, aligned perfectly with buildings I could see from my apartment. I stopped streaming for 3 days. On the 3rd night, my computer turned on by itself at my usual stream time. OBS was running, broadcasting to an audience of 1. The chat showed only Nyx, typing the same message over and over. The show must go on. The show must go on. The show must go on. When I unplugged everything, my phone lit up with notifications, screenshots from my stream, taken from angles inside my apartment that my camera couldn't reach. One showed me sleeping, taken from directly above my bed. Another captured me in the shower through a gap in the curtain I didn't know existed. The last one depicted me right then, standing frozen in my dark living room, the photo taken from inside my closet. I grabbed a kitchen knife and yanked open the closet door. Empty. Just my clothes and the musty smell of forgotten laundry. But on the floor, a sticky note with more numbers in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing. The building's security log showed no one entering or leaving the supposedly vacant 4B. The super insisted the apartment was being renovated, though I'd never heard construction sounds. When I finally gathered the courage to knock, the door swung open at my touch. The space beyond was a mirror image of my apartment, but wrong. My streaming setup replicated perfectly, but the monitors showed views of my actual apartment from impossible angles. The walls were covered in printed screenshots from my streams, thousands of them, creating a mosaic that, when I stepped back, formed my face. In the center of it all, a single computer ran my stream from the night before. But in the footage, I wasn't alone. A figure stood behind my chair, translucent like a bad green screen effect, wearing the same headset now hanging on the doorknob. When I leaned closer to the screen, the figure leaned with me. When I raised my hand, it raised its hand. When I mouthed, "Nix," it smiled with my face. I ran back to my apartment and immediately started packing. As I threw clothes into a bag, my phone chimed with a Discord message. Nix had sent a trade request in-game. The item, soul-binding contract, binds when equipped, cannot be destroyed, cannot be unequipped. I declined the trade and blocked her. Seconds later, a new message appeared from a different account. You already accepted. My streaming software launched itself again. This time, the webcam showed not my room, but the inside of 4B. In the frame sat someone in my chair, wearing my clothes, speaking in my voice to my audience. The chat exploded with variations of my username, each one slightly different. VoidRunner88, VoidRunner86, VoidWalker87, all typing in perfect synchronization. Welcome home. I stopped packing when I noticed my hands. Faint green lines traced along my veins, pulsing in rhythm with the LED on the headset still hanging in the hallway. The same rhythm as the status indicator on my game character. The same rhythm as the buffering symbol that appeared whenever Nix cast a healing spell. The computer screen flickered, showing my character stats. Where the player name should be, it now read, Nix Voidrunner 87 merged. The location showed not the game world, but my apartment address. The health bar depleted and refilled in real time with my heartbeat. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone's contact list had been replaced with names from my guild. My work email auto-responded that I was AFK indefinitely. My bank app showed transactions in gold pieces rather than dollars. The boundary between domains was dissolving, or perhaps it had never existed. Perhaps I'd been living in an instance all along, and Nix was just the administrator finally revealing herself, or perhaps the 3 months of 60-hour work weeks followed by 5-hour nightly streams had finally broken something fundamental in my perception. The vitamin D deficiency from never seeing sunlight. The isolation of remote work bleeding into digital relationships with avatars and usernames. The energy drinks and microwaved dinners and forgotten medications. But the headset in the hallway was real. I could touch it, feel its weight, smell the plastic and foam. When I finally picked it up, the speakers whispered without being powered, coordinates that led to my own location, repeated endlessly. I put it on, and through the dead speakers, I heard my stream playing. Not from the past or present, but from tomorrow night, and the night after, and the night after that. Always streaming, always online, always watched by Nix, who might be in apartment 4B, or might be in my room, or might be in my mind, or might be me. The last package arrived while I was writing this. Inside, a single key with a tag reading, Server Room, Maintenance Mode. It fits the lock on my apartment door from both sides. When I turn it, I hear the sound of a game loading, that familiar chime of entering a new instance. I stream again tonight. I have to. The show must go on. Nix will be watching, as she always has been, as she always will be. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the player or the played, the streamer or the stream, the healer or the wound that never closes. The headset sits on my desk now, pulsing its green heartbeat. Sometimes I wear it. Sometimes it wears me. The boundary blurs more each day, reality buffering and dropping frames. My neighbor in 4B still doesn't exist according to the building records, but I hear them typing through the walls. The same rhythm as my own keystrokes, creating this very sentence. I've started receiving donations during streams from usernames I recognize as fragments of my own thoughts. The bits form patterns that decode into memories I don't remember having. My viewer count shows numbers that don't exist in standard mathematics, figures that hurt to perceive directly. Tomorrow, Nix promised, she'll teach me the final heal, the one that repairs the break between virtual and real. I'm not sure I want to learn it. I'm not sure I have a choice. The contract was already signed in pixels and time, witnessed by an audience that might be real or might be subroutines of my fracturing perception. The cursor blinks on my screen, waiting for input. I don't remember starting this document. I don't remember stopping. The timestamp shows dates that haven't happened yet, edits from IP addresses that trace back to apartment 4B, to my own router, to servers that exist in the geometry between wall studs and beneath floorboards. My hands move across the keyboard without my volition now, typing responses to chat messages only I can see, or perhaps everyone can see them except me. Perhaps I'm the only one who thinks this is strange. Perhaps this is how it's always been, and the real psychosis was believing in the distinction between player and character, between streamer and audience, between self and the digital shadow that follows us through fiber optic veins. The headset whispers my name. Both of them. All of them. The ones I've chosen, and the ones chosen for me. In the reflection of my monitor, I see myself putting it on, though my hands remain still on the desk. The stream continues. The healing never stops. Nyx tends to wounds that exist in places bodies shouldn't have. Buffer overflows in my nervous system. Corrupted packets in my bloodstream. Memory leaks in spaces between thoughts. I hear knocking now, but I can't tell if it's from the door, the walls, or the inside of my skull. The rhythm matches my heartbeat, my stream bitrate, the refresh rate of reality itself. When I answer, I know what I'll find. Myself, wearing the headset, asking to borrow a cup of bandwidth, a pinch of processing power, a moment of existence. The green light pulses. The stream continues. Nyx is waiting in the void between frames, preparing the final gift, the one that's been inside me all along, waiting to be unboxed. I am the product. I am the content. I am the platform. The show must go on. Story 3. The Victorian Library breathes differently after midnight. I've worked the night shift for 3 years now, long enough to know the building's rhythms, the way the old radiators tick their metallic heartbeat, how the settling floorboards groan in predictable patterns. But last Tuesday, those rhythms changed. It started with the motion sensors on the 3rd floor. My job includes shutting them down at 2 a.m., part of the energy-saving protocol the city council insists on. The track lights are programmed for 60-minute intervals, giving me plenty of time to complete my rounds. That night, I'd barely reached the archive section when darkness swallowed the corridor behind me. 58 minutes early. I checked my watch twice, then pulled out my phone to confirm. 3 minutes. The lights had lasted 3 minutes. The security footage would show nothing unusual. I already knew that. It never did. Not for those 3 shelves wedged between archives and theology, where the cameras only ever returned that peculiar static. Not the sharp black and white snow of a dead signal, but something softer, like rain against glass. The IT department had checked the wiring 4 times. They'd replaced the cameras twice. The static remained. By Thursday, I'd discovered the return slips, fresh ones, printed that very night according to the timestamps, all bearing dates that hadn't happened yet. October 15th, 2027, March 3rd, 2029, December 24th, 2031. The server had been offline for maintenance since Monday. I stood there in the processing room, holding those impossible slips, feeling the paper's warmth as if they'd just emerged from the printer. The book return slot shouldn't have led anywhere except the collection bin. I'd emptied that bin hundreds of times, reaching through the narrow metal chute to gather the after-hours deposits. But when I pushed my arm deeper that night, following a book that had somehow wedged itself too far back, my fingers found empty space where the back wall should have been. I had to use my phone's flashlight to see it properly, a gap in the metal, rust-eaten edges suggesting age rather than recent damage. Beyond it, darkness that my light couldn't quite penetrate. The air flowing from that gap carried the distinct smell of old paper and something else, something organic and sweet like overripe fruit. Friday night, I brought better equipment. A proper flashlight, the kind security guards use, heavy and reliable. When I aimed it through the gap, I saw the service corridor. According to the building's original blueprints, which I'd studied in the historical archives, this passage had been sealed in 1947 following a structural collapse. Yet there it stretched, dusty but intact, its walls bearing a peculiar kind of graffiti, not spray paint. These marks had been scratched directly into the plaster, forming a crude map. Arrows indicated directions, X marks warned of specific spots, and a winding line traced what someone had labeled, in shaky letters, as the safe path. The path led deeper into the building's forgotten anatomy, past utility pipes that wept condensation, and electrical fixtures that hadn't been updated since Edison's time. I didn't follow it that night, but I photographed everything, spending an hour documenting each symbol, each warning. When I returned Saturday evening for my shift, something had changed. One of the X marks had moved 3 feet to the left. The safe path now curved differently around the third junction. The book revealed itself on Sunday. I'd been monitoring the religion section, specifically the shelf where theological arguments of the late Victorian era usually resided. At 3:17 a.m., the volume slid out on its own, dropping to the floor with a thud that echoed through the empty building. When I picked it up, a piece of paper fell from between its pages. Another map update, this one showing my current location marked with a circle labeled, "You are here." The book felt warm in my hands, its leather binding almost pulse-like. I reshelved it and walked away. 5 minutes later, I heard it fall again. This time, the map showed more detail. The service corridor extended further than I'd imagined, connecting to other condemned spaces. A forgotten basement archive, a maintenance shaft, rooms that didn't appear on any blueprint I'd seen. Someone had drawn tiny figures along the path, stick people in various poses. Running. Hiding. One appeared to be counting, hands over its eyes. Monday's shift brought the whispers. Not voices exactly, more like the suggestion of conversation happening just beyond the range of hearing. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, particularly near those 3 problematic shelves. The static on the security monitors grew more agitated, swirling in patterns that almost resembled faces. I found myself drawn repeatedly to the book return, shining my light through that gap, studying how the graffiti map had changed again. The safe path now included timing notations. Wait 30 seconds here. Move quickly past Junction B. Do not stop regardless of what you hear. Tuesday night, I made my decision. The map had evolved into something almost like a game board, complete with what looked like rules scratched into the corridor's entrance. Follow the path. Don't deviate. Trust the shadows. Ignore the lights. I squeezed through the gap at 2:47 a.m., my flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. The corridor smelled stronger here, that sweet rot mixing with machine oil and something medicinal. My footsteps seemed too loud, echoing wrong, as if the sound bounced off surfaces that weren't there. The first junction matched the map perfectly. I waited the prescribed 30 seconds, counting them out while my light flickered, not failing, just dimming rhythmically like a heartbeat. At 15 seconds, I heard footsteps above me, in what should have been the third-floor reading room. They moved in a pattern, repetitive and deliberate. Dancing, maybe, or pacing. The second junction required speed. I moved quickly past the opening, glimpsing something in my peripheral vision. A shape that might have been a person standing very still, or might have been old furniture covered in sheets. I didn't stop to investigate. By the third junction, the whispers had become clearer without becoming more comprehensible. They seemed to be counting, but not in any sequence I recognized. The numbers jumped randomly, 17, 4, 91, 6, yet maintained a rhythm that felt intentional. The map led me to a room that shouldn't exist, positioned directly beneath the theology section. The door stood open, revealing row upon row of card catalogs. The old wooden kind the library had supposedly destroyed in the 1990s digital conversion. Each drawer bore a date instead of alphabetical ranges. I pulled one labeled October 15, 2027, the same date from those impossible return slips. Inside, hundreds of cards, each describing a book that didn't exist, or didn't exist yet. Titles like The Architecture of Shadows and Whispering Calculus, and The Doctrine of Temporal Displacement. Each card included a call number that corresponded to empty spaces on our current shelves. The footsteps above me grew more insistent. I could hear them clearly now. Multiple sets, moving in that same deliberate pattern. The counting whispers rose in volume. 43, 11, 77, and I realized they were coordinates, shelf numbers. The dancers above were moving between specific points in the library. I photographed everything I could, my phone's camera struggling in the dim light. The flash revealed details I hadn't noticed, scratches on the floor forming arrows, pointing back the way I'd come but also forward, deeper into the corridor system. The sweet smell grew stronger from the forward path. That's when I noticed the book on the table in the corner, same binding as the one that had been moving itself, but the title had changed. Now it read, The Night Librarian's Guide to Building Maintenance. Inside, my photograph stared back at me from an employee ID dated 1923. The name was mine, but the face was older, worn down by decades I hadn't lived. The whispers stopped. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something far worse. The sound of someone writing, scratching really like fingernails on plaster, updating the map. I ran, not back the way I'd come, but forward, following the arrows scratched into the floor. The corridor twisted impossibly, defying the building's architecture. I passed doors that opened onto rooms filled with static, actual static hanging in the air like frozen rain. My flashlight beam began to bend, curving around corners before I reached them. The writing sound followed me, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always just out of sight. The sweet smell grew overwhelming, making my eyes water. I stumbled through another door and found myself in a mirror image of the processing room, except all the return slips showed past dates, 1847, 1923, 1958. All years when librarians had gone missing, according to the records I'd found weeks ago while researching the building's history. The map appeared again, scratched directly onto the wall in front of me. This time it showed two paths, one leading out, one leading to a room marked only with a question mark. The counting started again, but now I recognized my own voice among the whispers, reciting call numbers I'd never learned. I chose the exit path, moving through corridors that grew progressively more familiar, more real. The sweet smell faded. The whispers dropped to their usual barely audible level. Finally, I squeezed back through the gap into the processing room, my shift nearly over, dawnlight creeping through the windows. But the book was waiting for me on the processing desk, open to a page that showed the map again, updated once more. The question mark room now had a label, Tomorrow's Librarian. Below it, in my own handwriting, though I swear I never wrote it, was a note. Your turn to update the path. I've been back every night since. The map keeps changing, showing me new routes, new rooms, new impossibilities. I found employee records for people who haven't been hired yet. Books that will be written in decades to come. And always, always, that sound of someone scratching updates into the walls. Last night, I saw him, or me, or whatever stands between those three shelves when the cameras show static. Just a glimpse in the corridor, a figure in a Victorian librarian's uniform, face obscured by shadow. He was holding a book, adding pages to it. Pages about a night librarian who discovers a service corridor that shouldn't exist. Tonight's my turn to update the path. The map says so, and the map hasn't been wrong yet. I can feel the building breathing around me, waiting. The motion sensors will fail in 3 minutes instead of 60. The cameras will show their reign of static, and somewhere in the condemned spaces between what was and what will be, someone is counting. The book is warm in my hands now, its pages blank and ready. I know what I'm supposed to write. The next iteration of the map. The next set of rules for whoever comes after. Or before. Time moves strangely in the service corridors. I've started hearing my replacement already. He won't be hired for 4 years, but I can hear him walking the 3rd floor, checking the motion sensors, wondering why the lights fail so quickly. The building is preparing his path, and I'm the one who must mark it safe. The sweet smell is stronger tonight. It's coming from me now, seeping from my skin like overripe fruit. When I look in the mirror, my reflection is a half-second delayed, as if it needs time to remember what I look like. I understand now why the map changes. It's not being edited, it's being remembered. By the building, by the books, by all the night librarians who've walked these paths, leaving pieces of themselves in the scratches on the walls. We're all here, updating each other's routes through time, making sure the safe path stays safe. The whispers are calling me back to the corridor. They're counting down from 91 tonight. When they reach 0, I'll squeeze through that gap one more time. I'll follow the path to the question mark room, where tomorrow's librarian is waiting to show me yesterday's map. I've left my own instructions, scratched into the wall by the book return. Trust the shadows. Ignore the lights. The building remembers everything. You're not going insane. But I'm not entirely sure about that last part anymore. The count is at 17 now. The book is pulling me toward the return slot. My flashlight is bending its beam around the corner, showing me the way before I'm ready to see it. 4. The footsteps above have started their dance. 1. I can hear myself whispering from inside the walls. Story 4. The HVAC system has been breathing differently since she left. I notice it most at night, when the house settles into its supposed silence. That mechanical inhale and exhale carries something foreign now, like the air itself remembers her presence. 3 weeks have passed since I changed the locks, since I discovered what she'd hidden in the vents, and still the house feels occupied by more than just me. But I should start at the beginning, when loneliness made me stupid. The divorce papers were barely dry when I met her at the university library. I'd gone there seeking the academic quiet I remembered from better days. Before marriage, before compromise, before failure. She materialized beside me in the philosophy section, reaching for the same volume of Kierkegaard I'd been eyeing. Her fingers brushed mine as we both grasped the spine, and she laughed. A sound like wind chimes in a gathering storm. She told me she was working on her master's thesis about repetition and anxiety. The irony wasn't lost on me now, lying awake at 3:17 a.m., waiting for the thermostat to betray me again. Those first 2 weeks moved with dreamlike fluidity. She appeared at the coffee shop where I worked on my freelance projects, always ordering the same cortado, always happening to have an extra pastry she couldn't finish alone. By the third encounter, I'd stopped believing in coincidence. By the fifth, I'd stopped caring. The boundaries dissolved gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, she needed to use my bathroom during a walk through the neighborhood. Then she forgot her cardigan on my couch after we'd shared a bottle of wine. The cardigan became a phone charger, then a book, then, somehow, a toothbrush appeared in my medicine cabinet, though I couldn't recall her ever bringing one. I found myself anticipating her arrivals, which always coincided with dinner time. She'd text just as I was deciding what to cook. Thinking of trying that new Thai place. Want to join? But we never went to restaurants. Somehow we always ended up in my kitchen, her moving through the space with increasing familiarity, knowing which drawer held the bottle opener, which cabinet hid the good wine glasses. The night I first felt truly uneasy, she was seasoning a pan of vegetables, and I watched her reach for the salt without looking, her hand finding it instantly in its place beside the stove. She'd been in my house maybe 6 times. I'd lived there for 8 months and still occasionally opened the wrong cabinet looking for plates. She smiled when she caught me staring, but something in her expression made my spine tighten. A flicker of satisfaction, as if she'd won a game I didn't know we were playing. That weekend, I suggested we go to her place for once. The silence that followed stretched like pulled taffy, sweet and somehow wrong. She lived with roommates, she finally said. Complicated situation. Easier here. Always easier here. I started paying attention after that, noting how she moved through my house with proprietary confidence, her fingers trailing along walls as if marking territory. Once I found her in my home office, just standing there, facing the corner where my desk met the wall. When I asked what she was doing, she turned with that same wind chime laugh and said she was admiring the crown molding. My house didn't have crown molding. The breaking point came when I returned early from a canceled meeting. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but the front door was unlocked. I found her in my bedroom, kneeling beside the HVAC vent, her hands working at something I couldn't see. She looked up without surprise, as if she'd been expecting me. She said she'd dropped an earring. She wasn't wearing earrings. That night, I told her I needed space. The words came out clumsy, inadequate, but she absorbed them with unnerving calm. Of course, she understood. She gathered the things she'd left, or claimed to, and departed with a kiss on my cheek that felt like a brand. Her lips were cold, despite the warm evening. I changed the locks the next morning. The first sign that changing locks meant nothing came 3 days later. The thermostat, one of those smart models the previous owner had installed, showed a temperature adjustment at 3:17 a.m., 72 to 53 degrees. I'd been asleep, alone, my phone charging on the nightstand. The app recorded the change as manual from the unit itself. I reset it, changed the password, enabled two-factor authentication. It happened again the next night. Same time, same temperature. On the fourth night, I stayed awake, watching the hallway through my cracked bedroom door. At 3:16, I heard it, the whisper of climate control adjusting, the subtle shift in air pressure. The hallway remained empty. The thermostat had been changed from inside the wall. That's when I started checking the vents. The first bag was in the return duct in the living room, pushed far enough back that I needed a flashlight to spot it. Clear plastic, the kind that comes from the bulk food store, filled with coarse salt and something else. Dark strands wound through the crystals like veins. Hair. My hair, judging by the color, though I couldn't remember losing so much of it. I found 7 more bags throughout the system, each one placed at a junction where airflow diverged. The salt had begun to corrode the metal, leaving rust patterns that looked almost deliberate, like symbols I couldn't read. The hair in each bag was woven into intricate knots, tiny sculptures of organic matter that made my skin crawl to touch. The security cameras were my next investment, small, wireless things I could monitor from my phone. I positioned them to cover every entrance, the hallway, the living room. For a week, nothing. Then, on a Tuesday, the motion alert woke me at, of course, 3:17 a.m. The figure stood at my front door, back turned to the camera, absolutely still. The image was clear enough to see the rise and fall of breathing, the way the fabric of a familiar cardigan moved slightly in the breeze, but the face remained hidden. I watched for an hour, my heart hammering, as this person simply stood there, not knocking, not moving, just present. When I finally worked up the courage to check the door directly, no one was there. The camera, however, showed the figure hadn't moved. I was looking at empty space while my phone showed me someone standing in that exact spot. I refreshed the app. The figure remained. I went back to bed and watched until dawn, when the image suddenly showed my empty porch again, as if nothing had happened. The lock app was the worst revelation. Despite my new codes, despite the physical key change, it registered entries, always during the early morning hours, always when the cameras showed nothing, always using my old code that shouldn't work anymore. The logs showed the door opening, staying open for exactly 3 minutes, then closing. The motion sensors inside never triggered. I called a locksmith, had him install a deadbolt that could only be operated from inside. That night, I heard it sliding open from my bedroom. The sound was unmistakable. Metal against metal, that specific click of the bolt retracting. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept to the front door. The deadbolt was still engaged, but I could hear it opening, over and over, a rhythmic mechanical sound that seemed to come from inside the door itself. I started sleeping in hotels, but that brought no relief. The third night away, I got a notification from my security system. Motion detected in the master bedroom. The camera showed my empty bed, covers turned down as if someone had just risen. Then, as I watched, an impression formed on the mattress, the distinct shape of a body lying down. The covers pulled themselves up. The impression shifted, turned on its side, settled into sleep. I drove home at 90 miles per hour, burst through the door to find my bed exactly as I'd left it. Made, untouched, cold. But the smell lingered, that particular combination of lavender and something earthier, like soil after rain, her smell. The HVAC company found more than just the bags. The entire duct system had been mapped with tiny marks, scratched into the metal at regular intervals. The technician, a man who'd clearly seen his share of strange things, went pale when he showed me. The marks led from every room back to a central point, the main return in the hallway. Someone had been using the vents to navigate my house from inside the walls, but the crawl spaces were too small for a person. The technician insisted on this, even as we both stared at the clear evidence of deliberate intelligence in those markings. Too small for a person, he repeated, as if trying to convince himself. I've stopped changing the codes. I've stopped checking the cameras at 3:17 a.m. I've stopped pretending that locks and walls mean anything anymore. The house breathes around me, and sometimes I catch myself breathing in sync with it, as if we're sharing lungs. Last night I found a note in my own handwriting that I don't remember leaving. The habit of entering is harder to break than the habit of being entered. The therapist I've started seeing twice a week tells me that divorce can trigger elaborate stress responses, that the mind creates external threats to process internal trauma. She prescribes medication that makes the edges of things softer, but doesn't stop the thermostat from changing, doesn't prevent the salt from reappearing in the vents no matter how many times they're cleaned. I've started leaving dinner for two on the table. It's always gone by morning, though I live alone, though the cameras show no one, though I've stopped trying to understand the physics of it. The plates are washed, dried, put away in their proper places. She always knew where everything belonged better than I did. Sometimes I wake at 3:17 a.m. and feel the mattress dip beside me, feel the warmth of another body that isn't there when I turn to look. The phantom pressure remains, though, that sense of being shared, of boundaries that were crossed so gradually I never noticed until they ceased to exist entirely. The real estate agent says the house will be hard to sell with all the damage to the HVAC system, the strange corrosion patterns, the scratches inside the walls. She doesn't mention the other things, the way doors open in peripheral vision, the sensation of being watched from inside your own skeleton, the creeping certainty that possession has nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with knowing a space more intimately than its inhabitant ever could. I've started looking for new places, somewhere without central air, without smart locks, without the infrastructure for this kind of invasion. But I already know it won't matter. The habit has been formed, the pattern established. She mapped more than just my house in those 2 weeks. She mapped the distances between my thoughts, the crawl spaces behind my eyes, the ventilation of my very self. The HVAC system breathes, and I breathe. And somewhere in between those breaths, in that pause where the air reverses direction, she exists. Not as a person anymore, if she ever was just a person, but as an atmosphere, a pressure, a presence that has learned the most intimate habit of all. The habit of being always almost there, forever on the verge of materialization, perpetually entering without ever quite arriving. Tonight, the air tastes of salt and rain-wet earth. The thermostat reads 72 degrees, but my breath fogs in the cold. Somewhere in the walls, something that might be settling wood, or might be footsteps, traces the path she memorized. The circuit that leads from every room back to the center, back to the source, back to the place where entering became entered, where the boundary dissolved entirely. I leave the lights on now, all of them, as if illumination could reveal what hides in plain sight. But shadows have nothing to do with darkness. The real shadow is the space between what happened and what I remember happening, between the locks that changed and the entry that didn't, between the woman who left and the pattern that remained, encoded in the very air I'm forced to breathe. The HVAC system inhales, and I exhale, and in that exchange, in that sharing of processed air, the invasion continues. Not violent, not sudden, but gradual as breath itself, patient as the accumulation of salt in the vents, intimate as the knowledge of where everything belongs in a house that's no longer quite mine. The habit of entering, it turns out, is nothing compared to the habit of being unable to leave. Story 5. The highway stretches endless before me in the pre-dawn darkness, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the Australian outback. I've been driving road trains along this route for 15 years, and I know every pothole, every curve, every place where the mind starts playing tricks. The monotony breeds hallucinations. Everyone knows that. Heat mirages during the day, shadow figures at night. You learn to blink them away, shake your head clear, keep rolling. But what crossed my path at 3:47 a.m. on that Tuesday morning was different. The CB radio crackles with static as I round the bend near Copper Creek, my 3 trailers swaying gently behind the prime mover. The headlights cut through darkness thick as tar, illuminating nothing but empty road and the occasional tuft of spinifex grass. My eyes are heavy despite the thermos of coffee wedged between my thighs, the bitter taste still coating my tongue. Then I see it. At first, my brain refuses to process what's blocking the highway ahead. It's massive, easily 12 feet tall, and covered in what looks like canvas or tarpaulin, gray-white in the glare of my high beams. The shape underneath suggests something impossible, the distinctive bulk of an elephant, trunk and all, standing directly in my path. My foot slams the brake pedal. Air brakes hiss and scream. The road train shudders, jackknifing slightly as physics fights momentum. But there's no time, no distance. We're going to hit. I pass through it, not around, not over, through. The sensation is like driving through fog, except fog doesn't make your skin crawl with electric wrongness. For a split second, I smell something overwhelming, sawdust and cotton candy, animal musk and grease paint, the distinctive cocktail of scents that means only one thing: circus. The road train slides to a stop 50 meters past where the thing stood. My hands shake as I set the parking brake, my heart hammering against my ribs like it's trying to escape. In the side mirror, the road behind me is empty except for something on the asphalt. Dark stains that weren't there before. I shouldn't get out. Every instinct screams to keep driving, radio in the incident as hallucination-induced brake failure. Anything but step down from the cab. But I do. The night air hits me like a physical presence, thick and oppressive despite the desert cold. My boots crunch on the gravel shoulder as I walk back, flashlight beam dancing across the asphalt. Where the elephant thing stood, the road is covered in mud and crushed straw, still damp despite the fact it hasn't rained here in 3 months. The smell of circus is stronger now, mixed with something else. Decay, maybe, or just age. I kneel beside the mess, and that's when I notice them scattered in the mud. Tiny pieces of colored paper, confetti. I pick one up, and even in the flashlight's beam, I can see how faded it is, the colors bleached to suggestions of what they once were. The walk back to my truck feels longer than it should. The darkness presses in from all sides, and I have the distinct feeling of being watched by hundreds of eyes. When I reach the front of the prime mover, my flashlight catches something in the grill. More confetti, twisted into the metal gaps like it was blown there at high speed. But these pieces are different. Despite their apparent age, they're sticky with something that makes my fingers tingle when I touch them. I get back in the cab and drive. What else can I do? The CB radio starts acting up 20 kilometers down the road. Through the static, I hear voices. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably calling my handle. Dusty road, come in dusty road. The voices are high-pitched, almost childlike, but there's something wrong with the cadence. It's too perfect, too rehearsed, like they're reading from a script they don't understand. I don't respond. I've heard of pirate broadcasters out here, people who get their kicks messing with long-haul drivers, but this feels different. The voices continue for another 10 kilometers, always the same phrase, always that unsettling rehearsed quality, before fading back into static. Dawn is breaking by the time I reach the outskirts of Millerton, where I'm supposed to deliver my cargo. The familiar sight of the depot should be comforting, but something's off. As I drive the last stretch of highway, I start noticing things on the fence posts. Posters, faded and peeling, flapping in the morning breeze. I slow down to get a better look, and my blood turns to ice water. Circus International, appearing nightly, October 15, 1979. The poster shows a grand, big top, painted in reds and golds that have long since faded to pink and yellow. Underneath, smaller text promises death-defying acts and exotic animals from around the world. There's an elephant in the illustration, draped in decorative fabric, its eye seeming to follow me as I drive past. More posters appear every few hundred meters, all identical, all advertising the same dates from over 40 years ago. Some are so weathered they're barely more than tatters, but others look almost fresh, as if they were put up yesterday. The depot comes into view, and I try to shake off the creeping dread. I need to deliver this load, get some sleep, stop letting the isolation get to me. The night shift is always weird, I tell myself. The mind plays tricks. I pull into the loading bay and shut down the engine. The sudden silence is deafening. The depot looks deserted, which isn't unusual for this early in the morning, but something about the emptiness feels intentional, like everyone cleared out moments before I arrived. The office door opens, and the depot manager walks out, a thin man I've never seen before, though I've been delivering here for years. He's wearing a rumpled suit that looks decades out of style, and there's something about the way he moves. Too smooth, too practiced, like he's performing rather than walking. He approaches my window with a clipboard, and I notice his fingers are stained with something that might be ink or might be something else. The smell of sawdust and cotton candy wafts from his clothes. "You made good time," he says, but he's not looking at the road train. He's looking at me, studying my face with an intensity that makes my skin crawl. The rest of the equipment should be arriving soon. I stare at him, confused. My manifest says nothing about equipment, just the usual shipment of building supplies. He continues before I can respond, his voice taking on an odd, dreamy quality. "Someone called ahead, said one of the circus trucks finally made it through. After all these years, imagine that. The show can go on." My mouth goes dry. I manage to croak out that there must be some mistake, that I'm just hauling construction materials, but he waves me off with a smile that's too wide, too eager. "Oh, we know what you're really carrying. We've been waiting since '79. The circus never really left, you know. It just got delayed." I open my manifest, ready to prove him wrong, but the papers in my hands aren't what I printed out yesterday. They're older, yellowed, and the header reads, "Circus International, Equipment Manifest, October 1979. The cargo list includes items that make no sense: assembly poles, big top, performer rigging, animal containment units. 3. My hands start shaking. This isn't possible. I loaded this truck myself yesterday afternoon, watched them secure the pallets of lumber and concrete mix. But when I look in my side mirror at the trailers, they seem different somehow. The shape is wrong. The tarps covering them billow in ways that suggest different cargo underneath. The depot manager is still talking, but his words blur together. Something about how the performers have been practicing, staying ready, waiting for their equipment to arrive so they could put on one last show. He mentions that they've been rehearsing in the old fairgrounds, that I should stop by and see them, that they'd be so happy to know their wait is finally over. I don't unload the cargo. I can't. Instead, I disconnect the trailers right there in the bay, leaving them behind as I drive away in just the prime mover. The depot manager doesn't try to stop me. He just stands there, still smiling that too wide smile, waving slowly as I leave. The drive back is worse. The radio won't turn off now, and the voices have multiplied. Dozens of them, all calling my handle in perfect unison, like a choir of something pretending to be children. Between the calls, I hear other things. Carnival music played on instruments that sound waterlogged and wrong. The trumpet of an elephant that seems to come from inside the cab. The crack of a ringmaster's whip that makes me flinch every time. The confetti is spreading. I find pieces of it on the dashboard, in the cup holders, twisted into my hair. Each piece leaves that tingling sensation on my skin, and I'm starting to notice a pattern in the colors. They form pictures when you arrange them right. Images of performers frozen mid-act, their faces twisted in expressions that might be joy or might be screams. I stop at a rest area to splash water on my face, to try and think clearly. The bathroom mirror shows me something I don't want to see. My reflection, But behind me, in the background that should just be bathroom stalls, there's a suggestion of tent canvas, of poles and rigging, of shapes moving in ways that human bodies shouldn't move. When I get back to the truck, there's someone sitting in the passenger seat. Not someone. Something wearing the idea of someone, dressed in a ringmaster's coat that's more memory than fabric. It doesn't turn to look at me when I freeze in the doorway, just stares ahead through the windshield. I can smell it from here. That circus smell, but underneath it, something else. Mothballs. Formaldehyde. Time itself somehow, rotting. It speaks without moving its mouth. The words appearing in my head like they've always been there. You're part of the show now. You've been part of it since you drove through. The circus needs its vehicles, needs its drivers. We've been waiting so long for someone to complete the delivery. I want to run, but my legs move of their own accord, carrying me to the driver's seat. My hands grip the wheel. The engine starts without me turning the key. As we drive, the thing beside me continues its soundless monologue. It tells me about the circus that came to town in 1979, about the performance that went wrong, about how sometimes things get stuck between moments, repeating endlessly, waiting for one small detail to complete the cycle. It tells me about the other drivers who've passed through over the years, how they almost made it but always turned back, always refused to finish the delivery. But I didn't turn back. I left the trailers. The landscape outside begins to change. The sun, which should be climbing higher, seems stuck at dawn, painting everything in perpetual golden hour light. The road signs are wrong. They advertise towns that haven't existed for decades, distances that don't make sense. Every few kilometers, more circus posters appear, but now they're advertising future dates. Coming soon, next week, tomorrow night only. The CB radio crackles to life one more time, but now it's my own voice coming through, calling out my handle in that same rehearsed, childlike tone. I hear myself from yesterday, from tomorrow, from 1979, all overlapping in a cascade of temporal echoes. I'm still driving. I've been driving for hours, or days, or decades. The fuel gauge never moves. The thing in the passenger seat has started to hum, circus tunes that burrow into my skull like parasites. Sometimes I pass other vehicles on the road, and I recognize them. Other road trains, their drivers staring straight ahead with the same blank expression I probably wear now. All of us hauling invisible cargo to a destination that doesn't exist anymore, or doesn't exist yet, or exists in every moment simultaneously. The confetti has covered everything now. It pours from the air vents, crystallizes on the windows, forms drifts on the floor. Each piece shows a different scene from a circus performance. Acrobats frozen mid-leap, animals posed in impossible positions, audiences whose faces are all turned away. When I try to brush them aside, they stick to my skin, and I can feel myself becoming part of the performance. My memories rewriting themselves to include rehearsals I never attended, shows I never performed in. I check my phone to call for help, but the date is wrong. October 18th, 1979. The next day it's October 19th, 1979. Then October 20th. The circus is coming. The circus is here. The circus never left. In my mirrors I can see them now. The other performers, following in a convoy that stretches back to the horizon. They're all waiting for me to lead them to the fairgrounds, to complete the delivery that's been 40 years in the making. Some of them wave from their cabs, and I recognize their faces from the faded posters, unchanged despite the decades, their smiles painted on like makeup that won't wash off. The road ahead splits, and I know one path leads back to the normal world, to the depot where confused workers are probably wondering why I left 3 trailers full of construction materials behind. But my hands turn the wheel toward the other path, the one that leads to the old fairgrounds, where I can already see the ghost of a big top rising against the dawn sky, where the sound of phantom calliope music drifts across the desert air. I'm going to complete the delivery. I have to. It's the only way the show can go on. And somewhere, in the part of my mind that's still my own, I understand the truth. I did drive through something that night. Not an elephant, not exactly. I drove through a moment that's been repeating for 40 years, waiting for someone to close the loop. And by leaving those trailers behind, by trying to escape, I've become the missing piece the circus has been waiting for. The depot manager was right. The circus never really left. It just needed a new driver to help it finish arriving. The fairgrounds loom ahead, and I can see them all now. Performers rehearsing routines in empty fields. Elephants that are just suggestions of elephants practicing tricks for audiences that exist in the spaces between seconds. They're all turning to watch me approach, their painted faces bright with an anticipation that's been building since 1979. I pull into the fairgrounds as the sun finally sets, or rises. It's hard to tell anymore. The thing in my passenger seat is gone, but I can feel it in the mirrors, in the confetti, in the voices on the CB that won't stop calling my name in perfect, rehearsed harmony. Tomorrow is October 22nd, 1979, the last night of the show. Or maybe it's the first. I don't think it matters anymore. Story 6. The salt air should have been cleansing. That's what I told myself when we first pulled up to the beach house, its weathered walls rising like ancient fortifications against the darkening Atlantic sky. The driver, a local with sun-damaged skin and eyes that never quite met mine, helped unload our bags while muttering something about the electric gate. I caught fragments, temperamental, storms. Best to prop it open. We were 6 altogether, old college friends scattered by a decade of careers and commitments, drawn back by nostalgia and the promise of isolation. The house sat at the end of a private road, surrounded by a 10-foot concrete wall topped with broken glass. A relic from more paranoid times, the rental listing had assured us. Perfect privacy, it promised. Uninterrupted ocean views. The first sign should have been the landline. Dead static when I lifted the receiver, though the listing guaranteed a working phone. Cell service flickered between 1 bar and nothing, depending on which corner of the house you stood in. My friend, let's call him the organizer, the one who'd found this place, shrugged it off. We had come here to disconnect anyway, hadn't we? That first evening settled over us like a damp shroud. We grilled fish on the patio, the ocean's rhythmic breathing mixing with our laughter, but I kept glancing at the wall. Through the gaps where the gate stood propped open, I could see the access road dissolving into darkness. No streetlights out here. No neighbors for at least a mile. Around 9 o'clock they came. 3 young men, maybe early 20s, materialized at the gate like they'd condensed from the humid air itself. Their smiles were too wide, too practiced, as they offered services we didn't need. Gardening, pool cleaning, security. The organizer politely declined. They persisted, their Portuguese accented English growing more insistent. Did we need anything from town? Protection? They knew this area, they said. Knew it well. Something in their tone made my skin prickle. The others felt it too. Conversation on the patio had died. When the organizer firmly said no thank you and moved to close the gate, one of them, the tallest, with a face that seemed to shift between handsome and grotesque depending on the angle, placed his hand on the metal bars. "You should reconsider," he said, still smiling. "The nights here, they can be difficult." They left eventually, melting back into the darkness, but the evening's mood had soured. We moved inside, locking doors that suddenly seemed too flimsy, checking windows that faced nothing but black glass reflecting our own nervous faces. The first stone hit around midnight. A sharp crack against the kitchen window, loud enough to jolt us from half-sleep. Then another, and another. We huddled in the living room, lights off, listening to the percussion of rocks against walls, roof tiles, shutters. Someone was circling the house, methodical and patient. The organizer called the police on his barely functioning cell phone, shouting over the static. They promised to send a patrol. Then came the mortars. Not military grade, probably fireworks. But the explosions against the wall sent vibrations through the house's bones. Green laser pointers danced through windows like searching eyes, painting our faces in sick, alien light. We pressed ourselves against interior walls, away from the windows, breathing in short gasps. The attack, if that's what it was, lasted maybe an hour. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence descended. We waited, muscles cramped from tension, until red and blue lights finally washed across our walls. The police had arrived. 2 officers, looking bored despite our frantic explanations, walked the perimeter with flashlights. They found nothing. No footprints in the sandy soil, no spent fireworks, not even the stones we swore had pelted the house. They took our report with the weary patience of men who'd heard it all before. Probably local kids, they said. It happens sometimes with rentals. We'll patrol every hour tonight. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sound of every settling board, every gust of wind. I dozed fitfully on the couch, starting awake each time headlights swept past. The promised hourly patrols, I told myself, though the intervals seemed irregular, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. Morning brought the driver back, ostensibly to check if we needed anything. But his real purpose became clear when he led us to the wall's exterior and showed us the telephone line, severed with surgical precision, the cut so clean it looked laser-made. He met my eyes then, for the first time. "This wasn't random," he said quietly. "Someone wanted you isolated." The day passed in a haze of unease. We tried to maintain normalcy, swimming, cooking, playing cards, but everyone kept glancing at windows, at the gate, at the dying light. The woman who'd been most skeptical the night before suggested we leave. The organizer argued we'd paid for 3 nights, and besides, the police were watching. The debate grew heated, then died into sullen silence. As darkness crept back, we prepared. Moved furniture against doors, found flashlights, kitchen knives, anything that might serve as protection. We would not be caught off guard again. But the second night brought something worse than stones or explosives. It started with the intercom, the one connected to the gate we'd disconnected that morning, unplugging it from the wall. Yet at 11 p.m. exactly, it crackled to life. A young man's voice, cheerful and clear, repeated the same phrase in accented English. "You won't sleep tonight. You won't sleep tonight. You won't sleep tonight." The impossibility of it, an unplugged device speaking, sent us into barely controlled panic. Someone grabbed the unit, smashing it against the tile floor. The voice continued from the broken pieces. "You won't sleep tonight." We fled to the bedrooms, barricading ourselves in pairs. I shared a room with another friend, call him the skeptic, who insisted there had to be a rational explanation. Hidden speakers, a prank. But his hands shook as he helped me push the dresser against the door. The house began to breathe. That's the only way I can describe it. The walls seemed to expand and contract with a rhythm that didn't match our own panicked breathing. The sound of the ocean, which should have been constant, came in waves that synchronized with this breathing. In, out, in, out. Whispers seeped through the walls, not in English or Portuguese, but in something older, more fundamental, a language of pure intent that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the primitive brain. The skeptic pressed his palms against his ears, but I could see in his eyes that it didn't help. The whispers were inside now. At some point, time had become elastic, meaningless. I realized the skeptic had stopped moving. He sat rigid on his bed, eyes open but unseeing, mouth slightly agape. I shook him, slapped him, but he remained frozen, barely breathing. Then I heard it. His voice, coming from outside the window, even though he sat right beside me. "Let us in," his voice said. "We're already inside." The paradox of it broke something in my mind. I laughed, a sound that didn't belong to me, too high, too long. The laughter spread through the house, echoing from empty rooms, until I couldn't tell if I was still laughing or just hearing the echo of some future moment when I would laugh like this again. Dawn came like a fever breaking. The skeptic blinked, confused, with no memory of the night. The others emerged from their rooms with similar gaps, hours missing, replaced by vague impressions of dreams that felt more real than the morning light. We packed in wordless agreement. Whatever this was, we were leaving. The rental company could keep their money. As we loaded the cars, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. Our footprints in the sandy soil around the house formed patterns, deliberate, ritualistic patterns that none of us remembered making. The gate, which had been jammed open for 2 days, swung freely now, closing behind us with a decisive click. We drove in convoy toward town, toward safety, toward sanity. But as we reached the main road, my phone, suddenly blessed with full bars, buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just coordinates. Nothing else. The coordinates led to a news article from 3 years ago. 6 tourists found wandering the beaches, minds broken, babbling about a house that breathed, about names spoken in impossible orders. They'd been institutionalized. The house had been demolished. I looked back toward where we'd come from. The access road was gone. In its place, thick vegetation that looked decades old swayed in the morning breeze. We drove in silence after that, each lost in our own thoughts, our own doubts. It wasn't until we reached the city that someone finally spoke. The organizer, his voice hollow. The house in my booking, it was at a different address. We never discussed what happened next. How we wordlessly agreed to check into a hotel together, to stay in the same room that night, taking shifts watching each other sleep. Because that evening, as we finally began to relax, to convince ourselves it had been some elaborate scam or shared delusion, the hotel room's doorbell rang. No one stood in the hallway, but the intercom, the one this modern hotel shouldn't have had, played a recording. Our names, spoken in that same cheerful voice from the beach house, in the exact order of who had fallen asleep first the night before. I still hear it sometimes, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause before thunder, in the silence after someone calls my name. That voice, listing us like items on a manifest, like inventory being cataloged. We scattered after that hotel night, stopped returning calls, stopped acknowledging what we'd shared. But last week, I received an email from the organizer. Just a link to a rental listing. A beach house, newly constructed, with walls of weathered concrete that couldn't possibly be new. The photos showed rooms I recognized, angles that made my hands shake. And in the reviews, 5 stars across the board. Recent guests raving about the privacy, the isolation, the unforgettable experience. The most recent review, posted yesterday, was from someone with the skeptic's name, though I know he died 2 years ago in what the papers called a swimming accident. His body found arranged in a pattern on a beach none of us recognized. The review was brief. Already inside. Your turn to visit. I've been sitting here for hours, cursor blinking in the booking field, my hands moving without my permission to enter credit card details I don't want to give. The dates auto-populate, 3 nights, starting tomorrow. The same dates we'd booked 3 years ago. I know I shouldn't go. I know it's not real. Can't be real. But my bags are already packed, sitting by the door I don't remember approaching. The car keys are in my hand, cold and solid and undeniable. The booking confirms itself. The directions download. And somewhere, in a house that shouldn't exist, an intercom is already crackling to life, practicing the pronunciation of names it has no right to know. I can hear the ocean calling. It sounds like breathing. It sounds like home. Story 7. The smoke detector in stairwell B started screaming at 2:47 a.m., just like it had every Tuesday night for the past 3 weeks. I grabbed my toolkit and headed down the corridor, the familiar weight of resignation settling into my bones. 3 years working nights at Whitmore Hall, and I'd thought I'd seen everything this converted dormitory could throw at me. Burst pipes in the dead of winter, raccoons in the ventilation system, the occasional drunk student who'd somehow wandered into our mixed-use building thinking it was still campus housing. But Stairwell B was different. Always had been. The building stretched 7 stories into the Portland night, its brick facade dating back to 1952, when it housed exclusively female students. Now it was a patchwork of residential units and small offices, most of them empty after dark. My domain. I preferred it that way. The silence, the solitude, the predictable rhythm of checking locks and replacing burnt-out bulbs. until the alarm started. I pushed through the heavy fire door into stairwell B, and the temperature dropped immediately. Not unusual, the stairwell had always run cold, something about the way the air circulated through the narrow vertical shaft. The alarm continued its piercing wail, echoing off the concrete walls. I climbed toward the third-floor landing where the detector was mounted, my footsteps reverberating in the enclosed space. The thing about stairwell B was that nobody used it. The main stairwell and elevators handled all the traffic. This one sat at the building's northwest corner, technically functional but psychologically abandoned. Even during fire drills, people gravitated toward the other exits. Maybe it was the narrow treads, or the way the fluorescent lights flickered no matter how many times I replaced them, or just some indefinable wrongness in the angles where the walls met. I reached the detector and waved my hand beneath it, checking for smoke. Nothing. Pressed my palm against the wall, cold to the touch. No heat, no fire, no reason for the alarm. I pulled out my ladder, climbed up and reset the unit. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had been. That's when I heard it. My name, full name, first and last, whispered from somewhere above me. The landing between the third and fourth floors. I froze on the ladder, one hand still on the detector. The whisper came again, patient and clear despite the concrete acoustics that should have garbled it. Nobody should know my last name here. My badge just said, maintenance, and the few residents I encountered called me by my first name, if they called me anything at all. I descended the ladder slowly, folded it, and started up toward the sound. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like walking through water. The fluorescent tube above the landing flickered, 3 quick pulses, then steady light. On the landing, centered perfectly on the painted yellow line, sat an access card. The plastic was yellowed with age, the magnetic strip worn but intact. A decade-old design from before the system upgrade. Someone had scratched initials into the surface with something sharp. My initials. I picked it up, turned it over. The scratches caught the stuttering light, forming patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. A memory surfaced, incomplete, like trying to recall a dream. Had I worked here before? Before the 3 years I remembered clearly? The thought slithered away when I tried to grasp it. I pocketed the card and continued my rounds, but the building felt different now. Watchful. The familiar creaks and settling sounds took on new meanings, conversations in a language I couldn't quite parse. By dawn, I'd convinced myself to check the building records. The administrative office kept archives in the basement, rows of filing cabinets that nobody had bothered to digitize. I found the maintenance logs easily enough, traced my finger back through the years. 3 years, just as I remembered. Then a gap. Then, 11 years ago, another name, but the same employee ID number. The name was smudged, unreadable, but the ID matched mine exactly. The incident reports were in a separate cabinet. I pulled the file for Stairwell B, thick with age-softened papers. Most were routine, burnt-out lights, graffiti, the occasional locked-out resident. But there, flagged with a red tab, Stairwell B closed for renovations, March-September. The year matched the gap in employment records. The details were sparse. Multiple panic incidents reported. Residents claimed to hear voices. 3 individuals separately reported responding to their names being called, resulting in disorientation and temporary memory loss. Recommend full closure pending investigation. The investigation results weren't in the file, or they were, but the pages had been removed, leaving only the ragged edges where they'd been torn out. The following Tuesday, I waited. At 2:47 a.m., the alarm sounded. I climbed to the 3rd floor, reset the detector, and stood perfectly still. The whisper came, as I knew it would. My name, complete and correct, from that impossible space between floors. This time I responded. Present, I said, the word escaping before I could stop it, like answering roll call, like I'd done it before. The alarm stopped mid-shriek, not winding down, not fading, stopped, as if someone had severed the wire mid-pulse. The silence rushed in to fill the space, dense and expectant. A door opened above me. Not the fourth floor door. I knew that sound, the particular squeak of its hinges. This was different, older, like wood swollen with humidity finally breaking free of its frame. But there were no wooden doors in stairwell B. Everything was steel, up to fire code, painted industrial beige. I climbed toward the sound. The landing between floors seemed longer than it should be, the stairs multiplying beneath my feet. The scratched access card grew warm in my pocket, pulsing like something alive. The walls began to show their age, not the maintained face they presented during normal rounds, but water stains spreading like bruises, paint bubbling and peeling in patterns that reminded me of growth, of things pushing through from the other side. The fourth floor landing was wrong. Where the door should be, there was a gap. Not an opening, but an absence, as if reality had simply forgotten to fill in that particular space. Through it, I could see another stairwell, identical but reversed. Mirror image. In that reflected space, someone stood with their back to me, wearing maintenance coveralls. My coveralls. The figure's hand rested on a smoke detector, frozen in the act of resetting it. I reached out and my hand met cold glass. No, not glass. Something that gave slightly under pressure like a membrane. The figure in the reflection moved when I moved, but delayed, a half-second behind. I pulled my hand back and watched my reflection continue reaching forward, pressing against the barrier from the other side. The scratched access card fell from my pocket, clattering on the concrete. When I bent to retrieve it, I saw the scratches had changed. No longer my initials, but words, carved in cramped, desperate letters. Don't answer twice. Too late. The whisper came again, directly behind me now, close enough that I felt breath on my neck. But when I turned, the stairwell was empty. The walls had returned to normal, freshly painted, and properly lit. The door to the fourth floor stood solid and unremarkable. I ran. Down the stairs, through the fire door, into the familiar hallways of the building I thought I knew. But something had changed. The security office, when I reached it, showed me on the monitors. Multiple versions of me, on different floors simultaneously. One checking the boiler room, one replacing lights in the lobby. One still standing in stairwell B, staring at something the cameras couldn't capture. I called in sick the next night. And the next. On the third night, my supervisor called. They'd had complaints. The smoke detector in stairwell B had been going off continuously. The night janitor needed to fix it. What night janitor? I asked. My replacement. But I hadn't been replaced. I'd just been sick. No, he insisted. The other one. The one who'd been working there for years. I drove to Whitmore Hall at 2 a.m. My keycard didn't work. The one in my pocket, the scratched one from the stairwell, opened the door immediately. Inside, I heard the alarm, saw myself through the glass doors of the security office, watching the monitors. That other me looked up, made eye contact, and smiled. I check the records obsessively now. My employment history changes each time. Sometimes 3 years, sometimes 11. Sometimes I've never worked there at all. The building directory lists my apartment on the fourth floor, Unit B7. I've never lived at Whitmore Hall. I live across town, in a studio above a coffee shop, don't I? But I have keys to B7. They're on my key ring, worn smooth from use. The whisper follows me home. Not every night, but often enough. My full name, patient and clear, from spaces that shouldn't exist. The gap between my refrigerator and the wall, the crawl space above the ceiling, the moment between sleep and waking. I don't answer anymore. I've learned that much. Last week, I found a note in my own handwriting. Check the cameras. I did. The security footage from Whitmore Hall, which I somehow still have access to, shows the landing between the third and fourth floors. Every Tuesday at 2:47 a.m., someone appears there. Someone in maintenance coveralls. They reset the smoke detector, fold their ladder, and start to climb. They pick up an access card. They look directly at the camera. It's me. But I haven't been back to Whitmore Hall in 2 weeks. Or have I? The timestamp on the footage is from next Tuesday, 5 days from now. I watch myself climb those stairs, respond to a whisper the cameras can't record, and disappear into that impossible gap between floors. The footage loops, showing the same scene again and again, each time slightly different. Each time, I look more tired, more hollow, like something being slowly emptied out. I've stopped checking the records. They only confuse things further. Sometimes I've worked at Whitmore Hall for 3 years. Sometimes 11. Sometimes I'm still there, every night, climbing those stairs. The whisper knows the truth, speaks it in the syntax of my name, but I can't afford to answer. Not again. The scratched access card sits on my kitchen table. The initials change when I'm not looking. Mine, then others, then symbols that hurt to perceive directly. Sometimes it's not there at all. Sometimes it's in my pocket, warm and pulsing, even though I know I left it on the table. Tonight is Tuesday. In 3 hours it will be 2:47 a.m. The smoke detector in my apartment has started chirping. Not the full alarm, just the periodic beep of a dying battery. But I changed the battery yesterday, and the day before, and every day for the past week. I know what happens next. The full alarm will sound. I'll climb onto something to reach it. A ladder that shouldn't be in my apartment but will be. The whisper will come, speaking my name from that space between spaces. And I'll answer, because I always have, because I always will, because in some version of this story, I never stopped answering. The camera in the corner of my room, when did I install that? Shows me sitting at my kitchen table writing this. But in the reflection on my laptop screen, I'm standing in stairwell B, my hand on the detector, frozen in an endless loop of almost understanding. Don't answer twice, the card warns. But what if I already have? What if I've answered so many times that the echoes have become autonomous, creating their own cycles, their own Tuesdays, their own 2:47 a.m.s? The alarm is starting now. Not in my apartment. That comes later. But somewhere, in a stairwell that exists in the space between what was and what should never be, a smoke detector screams without cause. Someone in maintenance coveralls starts to climb. They look like me. They've always looked like me. Because they are me, all of them. Every Tuesday, every answer, every version that responded when they should have stayed silent. I'm going to Whitmore Hall, not because I choose to, but because I already have. The timestamp proves it. The cameras never lie, even when they show impossible things. Especially then. The whisper is calling now. It knows my name. It's always known my name. Because it's me, calling from next Tuesday, trying to warn the me from last Tuesday, trapped in a stairwell that exists outside of time, where every alarm that sounds has already been silenced, and every silence is just the space before the next alarm. I answer. I always answer. Present. Story 8. The notification sound from my gaming headset still echoes in my apartment at night. That synthetic chime that used to mean victory, but now makes my skin crawl. It started 3 weeks ago, right after I demolished some tryhard in a ranked match. 37 kills to his pathetic 3. I remember typing easy in the chat before his rage quit, savoring the disconnect notification like aged whiskey. I should have left it at that. The first message came 12 hours later, sliding into my DMs with the wet sound of something organic hitting glass. No username, just a string of numbers where the handle should be. The text made my coffee turn cold in my mouth. Nice blue recycling bin. Cedar Street really smells like pine after the rain, doesn't it? My apartment overlooks Cedar Avenue. The recycling bin, bright blue with a cracked lid, sits exactly where they described. I told myself it was coincidence, that anyone could guess these details. The eastern part of town is full of cedar trees. Half the apartment complexes probably use the same blue bins. But my hands trembled as I blocked the account, and the coffee tasted like copper for the rest of the morning. Working the graveyard shift at Lane Masters, the only 24-hour bowling alley in the state, used to be perfect for my gaming schedule. Empty lanes meant I could practice my aim between customers, using the pin setter's rhythm as a metronome for headshot timing. The fluorescent lights hummed at the exact frequency of my monitor at home, creating this seamless transition between work and play. That Tuesday night, everything felt different. The parking lot stretched out like a mouthful of broken teeth, each streetlight creating pools of sickly yellow that never quite touched each other. My car sat alone in the employee section, and as I approached, something white fluttered against the windshield. My first thought was a parking ticket, but campus security never came out this far. The paper was attached with reflective tape, the kind that burns your retinas when headlights hit it. 2 letters in block print, GG. Good game. I ripped it off, the tape leaving residue that caught the light like oil on water. Inside the bowling alley, the familiar crash of pins felt hollow, echoing wrong in the empty space. I kept checking the security monitors behind the counter, watching my car in the grainy black and white feed. Nothing moved except the occasional scatter of leaves across asphalt. By 4 in the morning, I'd convinced myself it was a prank. Some local kid who recognized me from the gaming cafes. Maybe someone I'd beaten before. The city's small enough that serious players know each other by reputation, if not by face. I ran my shift on autopilot, spraying shoes, resetting lanes, counting the register twice because the numbers kept swimming. The walk back to my apartment building at 7 a.m. felt like moving through syrup. Every shadow seemed to track my movement. Every reflection in the storefront windows showed shapes that shouldn't be there. The morning joggers looked like NPCs running predetermined routes, their faces blank and unseeing. Even the traffic lights seemed to change with purposeful malice, keeping me exposed at intersections longer than necessary. The manila envelope taped to my apartment door stopped me cold. No name, no apartment number, just smooth brown paper that whispered when I touched it. Inside was a printout, a screenshot I recognized immediately. The final scoreboard from that ranked match, my username glowing at the top. But something was wrong with the image. Behind the statistics, barely visible in what should have been the game's background, were photos. Photos of my hallway, my door, my doormat with the worn "Welcome" text. The angles were impossible. These were security camera feeds, but from cameras that didn't exist. Our building had 2 cameras, one at the main entrance, one in the lobby. These shots came from at least 6 different positions, including one that seemed to be looking directly through my peephole from the inside. I called the police. The officer who showed up took notes in a small pad, his pen scratching like insects in the walls. He walked through the building with me, checking the obvious places: utility closets, the roof access, the basement where the laundry machines hummed their endless cycle. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. We ended up at the electrical room in the basement. The door stood slightly open, though the super swore he'd locked it the night before. Inside, the familiar maze of circuit breakers and junction boxes looked exactly as it should, except for one detail that made my stomach drop. On the main panel, where the faded label reading "Main Building Power" had been for years, someone had placed a new sticker, laser printed, perfectly centered, "Private Match Server." The officer didn't understand the significance, just added it to his notes with the same bored expression. He suggested changing my locks, varying my routine, maybe staying with friends for a few days. Standard advice for standard stalking cases. But this wasn't standard. This was something else wearing the skin of harassment. That night, I didn't go home. Checked into a motel on the other side of town, one of those places that still used actual keys instead of cards. The room smelled like cigarettes and industrial cleaner, but it felt safer than my apartment with its compromised angles and invisible cameras. I brought my laptop, thinking I could distract myself with some casual matches. The hotel Wi-Fi was surprisingly good. Low ping, stable connection. I booted up the game, and my friends list showed the usual suspects online. But at the bottom, there was a new entry. No avatar, no status message, just a username that made my hands freeze over the keyboard. "Watching your 6." The user was listed as "in match." When I clicked on their profile, the game crashed. Not just to desktop, full blue screen, something I hadn't seen in years. When the laptop rebooted, the game was gone from my hard drive. Not uninstalled, but absent, like it had never existed. The folder where I kept my recordings was replaced with a single text file named rules.txt. Inside were coordinates, latitude and longitude that, when I plugged them into my phone, led to lane masters. The rational part of my brain screamed not to go, but something deeper, something primal and competitive, pushed me forward. This was a challenge, and I'd never backed down from one. The drive felt predetermined, like following a rail in an on-rail shooter. Every turn was exactly where I expected, every red light perfectly timed to build tension. Lane masters sat in darkness except for the sign, its neon letters flickering in a rhythm that seemed almost like Morse code. My key turned in the employee entrance with unusual resistance, like the lock was fighting me. Inside, the emergency lighting cast everything in deep red, turning the lanes into rivers of blood under black light. The sound hit me first, the distinctive ping of a headshot notification, playing from every speaker in the building. Then the screens lit up. Every monitor, every TV, every digital display showed the same thing, a first-person view of someone walking through a bowling alley. The perspective moved with inhuman smoothness, gliding between the lanes, the viewpoint exactly at my eye level. It took me 30 seconds to realize I was watching myself from behind. I spun around, but the alley was empty. On the screens, the view shifted instantly, now showing me from the front, my face pale and distorted in the digital reproduction. The perspective began to move again, circling me like a player checking their character model. I stood frozen, watching myself being watched, the recursive loop making reality stutter. The lane machines activated all at once, pins crashing down in perfect synchronization. But instead of the normal formation, they arranged themselves into letters, round 2. The screens changed, showing a game lobby. My username was there, already marked as ready. The opponent's name was just empty space, a void where text should be. A countdown timer appeared, 60 seconds until match start. I ran. Burst through the employee entrance into the parking lot where dawn was breaking like a fresh wound across the sky. My car started on the third try, and I drove without destination, just needing distance between me and whatever was happening in that building. But the game followed. Every screen I passed, ATM displays, digital billboards, even the screen on a gas pump showed the same countdown. 40 seconds, 30, 20. My phone buzzed with notifications from every gaming platform I'd ever used, all with the same message. Match starting soon. I pulled over at a rest stop, my hands shaking too badly to drive. 10 seconds, 5, 3, 2, 1. The world didn't end. No dramatic transformation, no obvious change. But something was different. The other cars on the highway moved in perfect lanes, never deviating, never speeding up or slowing down. The people at the rest stop walked in loops. To the bathroom, to the vending machine, back to their cars. Repeat. Their faces were blank, textures that hadn't fully loaded. My phone showed a new app I hadn't installed. Spectator mode. When I opened it, I saw myself from above. A third-person view like a game camera. My health bar was visible, depleting slowly. My inventory showed items I didn't possess. Keys to doors I'd never seen. Weapons that shouldn't exist. A photograph of my own grave that couldn't be real because I was still breathing, wasn't I? The app had one button. Respawn. I've been sitting in this rest stop for 3 hours now, or maybe 3 days. Time moves differently when you're not sure if you're the player or the played. The NPCs continue their loops, occasionally glitching through walls or freezing mid-stride. Sometimes I hear the notification sound, that synthetic chime that means something has changed in the game state. The countdown timer on my phone has started again. This time it's not for a match. It's labeled server maintenance. When it reaches 0, I wonder if I'll still be here, or if I'll finally understand what happens to avatars when players log off. The distinction between real and digital has become meaningless. Both are just different rendering engines for the same underlying code. I can see my reflection in the phone screen, and sometimes, for just a frame, it's not wearing my face. It's wearing no face at all, just a smooth texture waiting to be mapped. The real question isn't whether this is happening or whether I've lost my mind. The real question is, if this is a game, Who's holding the controller? The timer now reads 17 minutes. I think I'll press respawn before it reaches 0. Not because I want to, but because that's what players do. We always come back for one more match, even when we know we should quit. Even when the game itself has become the hunter. Especially then. The parking lot is empty now except for my car and the shadows that move without sources. In the distance I can hear the synthetic sound of pins falling, even though the nearest bowling alley is 20 miles away. Or maybe distance doesn't matter anymore. Maybe everything is just one large map, and I've finally found the boundaries. The timer reads 10 minutes now. My health bar is almost empty, but there are no health packs in this rest stop. Just vending machines that sell products with names I can't read, written in fonts that hurt to perceive. The bathroom doors lead to the same stall, no matter which one you enter. The mirror above the sink shows not my reflection but my character select screen, with stats I don't remember choosing. 5 minutes. The respawn button pulses with a light that doesn't exist in the normal spectrum. When I touch it, my finger passes through the screen like it's made of water, but I can feel the button's texture, cold metal that burns like ice. The sensation travels up my arm, rewriting nerve endings into USB ports. 3 minutes. I understand now. The match never ended. That rage quit wasn't a disconnect. It was a server migration. And I followed the player right into their domain, where the rules are different, where the physics engine responds to different parameters. 1 minute. The NPCs have stopped moving entirely, frozen mid-stride like a paused game. The sky has developed a grid pattern, like someone forgot to apply the texture properly. My phone shows a new message in that same empty username field. Good game. Play again? 10 seconds. I press respawn as the timer hits 0, and everything disperses into pixels before reforming, and I'm standing in my apartment 3 weeks ago, the notification sound from my gaming headset just beginning to echo. The scoreboard shows 37 kills to 3. My fingers hover over the keyboard ready to type EZI in the chat. But I don't, because I can see myself in the monitor's reflection, and behind me, impossibly, is another monitor showing another me, watching myself watch myself in an infinite regression of players, and played. The game never ended. It just started a new round, and somewhere, in a rest stop that may or may not exist, another version of me is still sitting, waiting for a timer that will never truly reach 0, because in private matches, the server owner makes the rules. The notification sound plays again, and again, and again. Story 9. The coffee in that diner tasted like burnt rubber and regret, but after 6 hours on Interstate 70, I would have drunk motor oil if it came with caffeine. The town, if you could call 3 streets and a grain elevator a town, had materialized from the Kansas flatlands like a mirage, all dust and faded paint under the October sun. I'd only stopped because the gas gauge was kissing empty, and the next station was 40 miles out according to my phone. That's when he approached me. I noticed the whistling first, an old tune I couldn't place, something that made my teeth ache with a memory I couldn't quite grasp. The man slid into the booth across from me without invitation, his smile too wide for the narrow geography of his face. Mid-40s, maybe older, with the kind of deep-set wrinkles that suggested either hard living or constant squinting against bright lights. His flannel shirt had seen better decades. He pointed at my laptop bag, specifically at the faded university sticker I'd slapped on there during freshman orientation 12 years ago. Said he recognized it, that his nephew had gone there too, graduated in '09. The coincidence should have been pleasant, a moment of connection in the middle of nowhere. Instead, something cold settled in my stomach. The man leaned forward, and I caught a whiff of something metallic on his breath, like he'd been sucking on pennies. He told me about his collection, vintage pinball machines, he said, from the Golden Age, Silverball Mania, Fireball, 8-Ball Deluxe. The way he rattled off the names suggested genuine enthusiasm, but his eyes never quite synced with his expression, like watching a dubbed movie where the audio runs a half second behind. He insisted I had to see them. Said they were just in his warehouse, a 5-minute walk. When I politely declined, explaining I needed to get back on the road, his smile flickered. Not disappeared, just stuttered, like a fluorescent bulb with a dying ballast. He persisted, mentioning a fully restored Gottlieb haunted house that still had all its original parts. The name made my skin prickle, though I couldn't say why. Finally, perhaps sensing my discomfort, he suggested we could drive there in his van. He'd parked it in the alley behind the diner, he said, and we could load one of the machines up if I was interested in buying. The prices he quoted were absurdly low, almost insulting to any real collector. That should have been my second warning, after the unsolicited approach. But loneliness and curiosity make fools of us all. I found myself following him out the back door. The alley was narrower than it should have been, the buildings on either side seeming to lean inward like they were sharing secrets above our heads. The October sun, so bright on Main Street, barely penetrated here. Our footsteps echoed wrong, too many times, from too many directions. The man kept walking, that same tune whistling through his teeth, but softer now, almost subsonic. Halfway down, I realized the alley was a dead end. A brick wall rose up 20 feet ahead. No doors, no windows, certainly no van. The man kept walking toward it, unhurried, still whistling. When I stopped and called out to him, he turned, and for just a moment his face was wrong. Not different, just wrong. Like looking at your reflection in disturbed water. He gestured toward the wall, insisting the van was right there. Couldn't I see it? His voice had changed, taken on an echo that didn't belong in the open air. That cold feeling in my stomach became ice. I backed away, mumbling something about remembering an appointment, and walked quickly, not quite running, back to the diner. My hands shook as I threw money on the table. Through the window, I could see him still standing in the alley mouth, watching. No, not watching, waiting. I grabbed my things and headed for my car, parked on the street out front. That's when I saw him again. Same flannel shirt, same too-wide smile, but he was standing across the street, in front of the boarded-up movie theater. Not walking from the alley, just there. He waved, a slow, deliberate gesture that made my scalp tighten. The physical impossibility of it made my vision swim. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers suddenly thick and clumsy, while he began crossing the street toward me with measured steps. The engine turned over on the third try. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, still waving, still smiling, growing smaller but never quite disappearing, even when physics said he should have been long out of sight. I drove for 20 minutes before my heart rate approached normal, before the trembling in my hands subsided enough to grip the wheel properly. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through engineering school, tried to construct explanations. Twins, maybe. Or I'd been more tired than I'd thought, microsleeping, hallucinating. The coffee had tasted strange. Could someone have slipped something into it? But every explanation crumbled when I held it up to the light. I stopped at the next town, a slightly larger collection of buildings that at least had a working traffic light. The gas station attendant, a teenager with suspicious eyes and bad skin, barely looked up from his phone when I prepaid. I asked him about the previous town, trying to keep my voice casual. He said nobody lived there anymore, not since the plant closed in Delaware 8. Maybe a few holdouts, he conceded when I pressed, but certainly no businessman with a warehouse full of vintage games. The unease followed me home like exhaust fumes, clinging to my clothes and hair. I tried to forget about it, to file it away with all the other strange encounters that happen on long drives through empty places. But 3 days later, curiosity won. I searched online for the town, for any mention of vintage pinball collections in that part of Kansas. Nothing. The town barely existed on the internet, just a Wikipedia stub mentioning its founding in 1887, and a population of 0 as of the 2010 census. I might have left it there. Might have successfully buried the memory if I hadn't driven back through Kansas 6 months later. Different route this time, but the detour was only 50 miles, and I told myself I needed to know. Needed to prove to myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, or misremembered, or something. The town was there, exactly as dead as I'd left it. The diner was closed, windows soaked over, parking lot cracked and weed-strewn. It looked like it had been closed for years. But I found the warehouse. It sat on the edge of town, a corrugated metal building the color of old bones. No signs, no indication of what it might have once held. The door was padlocked, but the lock was red with rust and fell apart when I tugged it. The door swung open on hinges that shrieked like wounded animals. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light from holes in the roof. The space was empty, except for shapes covered in tarps, lined up in rows like a morgue. My footsteps echoed in the vastness as I approached the nearest shape, reached for the tarp with a hand that had started trembling again. Underneath was a pinball machine. Gottlieb's haunted house. The playfield glass cracked but otherwise intact. I pulled another tarp, then another. Silver Ball Mania, Fireball, 8-ball deluxe. Exactly as he'd said. Dozens of them, all in various states of decay, their chrome dulled, their colors faded but still recognizable. At the back of the warehouse, spray painted on the wall in letters 3 feet high, was a name. My name. My last name, anyway. Not exactly common, but not unique either. The paint looked fresh, still had that aerosol smell, but when I touched it, it was bone dry. Had been for years. That's when I heard the whistling. Same tune, same subsonic quality that made my fillings ache. It came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the warehouse like water filling a tank. I ran, abandoning dignity, my feet slipping on the dusty concrete. Behind me, though I never looked back, I heard tarps rustling, being pulled away one by invisible hands. The door slammed shut just as I reached it. The handle wouldn't budge, wouldn't even rattle. The whistling grew louder, and underneath it, the sound of pinball machines coming to life. Bells ringing, flippers clacking, balls rolling through their eternal loops. The cacophony built to something almost melodic, almost like voices, almost like laughter. Then, silence. The door opened easily, as if it had never been stuck. I stumbled out into the late afternoon sun, gasping, my shirt soaked with sweat. When I looked back, the warehouse door stood open, revealing nothing but empty space and dust. No machines, no paint on the wall, nothing but bare concrete and rust. I drove home without stopping, 12 hours straight, fueled by gas station coffee and the kind of adrenaline that comes from touching something that shouldn't exist. But it wasn't over. The calls started a week later, always from blocked numbers, always at 3 a.m. Just whistling, that same horrible tune, then dead air. I changed my number. The calls continued. I moved apartments. They found me. I told friends, family, even filed a police report. Everyone listened with that particular expression people get when they think you're having a breakdown but don't want to say so. The photos were worse. They'd appear on my phone, in my cloud storage, sometimes printed and slipped under my door. Always the same. Me, standing in that warehouse, examining the pinball machines. But I looked wrong in them. Older maybe, or younger, it was hard to tell. My face was always turned away from the camera, but something about my posture suggested I was smiling that too wide smile. The man appeared occasionally, always at a distance, in crowds at the grocery store, 3 cars back in traffic. Standing at the bus stop I could see from my office window, always in that same flannel shirt, always watching, always almost but not quite the same man. Sometimes there were 2 of him, sometimes 3. Once, I swear I saw 5 of him, standing in a perfect line outside my apartment building, all facing my window, all waving in perfect synchronization. I've stopped trying to make sense of it, stopped trying to explain it to others. The therapist I saw for a few sessions prescribed pills that made everything fuzzy, but didn't make him go away. If anything, the medication made it worse. He appeared more often, closer, more solid. Last night, I found a package on my doorstep. No shipping label, no postmark, just my name written in chalk that smudged under my fingers. Inside, wrapped in that same flannel fabric, was a single pinball bearing. Silver, perfect. Heavier than it should be, When I held it up to the light, I could see something etched on its surface. Tiny letters, microscopic really, spelling out that same tune he whistles, like sheet music wrapped around a sphere. I keep it on my desk now, that impossible little sphere. Sometimes it rolls without being touched, tracing small circles that grow wider with each revolution until it reaches the edge and falls. It always returns to the center when I'm not looking. Sometimes I catch it humming, vibrating at a frequency that makes my vision blur. The man hasn't appeared in 3 days now. This should comfort me, but it doesn't. The silence feels like held breath, like the pause before a scream. I know he's coming back. They always come back. Or maybe I go to them. The distinction seems less important than it used to. Tomorrow I'm driving back to Kansas. I've already mapped the route, already called in sick to work. I need to know if the warehouse is still there, if it was ever there, if I'm still here. The pinball bearing rolls in tighter circles on my desk, picking up speed, singing its silent song. Maybe this time I'll go inside when he asks. Maybe this time I'll play those vintage machines, let the silver balls trace their predetermined paths through the bumpers and chutes. Maybe I'll discover what's behind that too wide smile, what he's been trying to show me all along. Or maybe I've already been there. Maybe I never left. Maybe I'm still standing in that dead-end alley, staring at a brick wall, while somewhere else entirely, another version of me writes this story, trying to make sense of the senseless, trying to map the unmappable. The pinball bearing has stopped rolling. It sits perfectly still in the center of my desk, but I can feel it pulling at something behind my eyes, drawing me back to that town that doesn't exist, to that warehouse full of games nobody plays, to that man who is everywhere and nowhere, whistling his tune through too many mouths. I leave this account here, though I doubt it matters. Either I'm losing my mind, or I found something that shouldn't be found. The distinction seems less important than it used to. The bearing is singing louder now. It sounds like coming home. Story 10. The first time I saw him, I convinced myself it was jet lag. 3 weeks into my exchange program at the college, buried in the reading room's perpetual twilight, I glimpsed a figure in a black tailcoat glide past the oak shelves. White gloves caught the lamplight as he moved with an economy of motion that made my own slouched posture feel like an insult to the furniture. When he reached the far wall, solid stone, no door, no window, he simply wasn't there anymore. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes until phosphones danced across my vision. The reading room remained unchanged. Dust motes suspended in amber light, the smell of old paper and leather bindings, the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the corridor. Nothing to suggest I'd seen anything at all. The college occupied a sprawling Victorian estate, all Gothic arches and leaded glass that fractured afternoon light into prismatic patterns. Service passages honeycombed the building, narrow corridors that connected the library to the kitchen to the chapel back to the dormitories. Students used them as shortcuts, though the older staff preferred the main hallways. Something about the passages made people uncomfortable after dark, when the electric lights hummed at a frequency that set teeth on edge. I might have forgotten the tail-coated figure entirely, if not for what happened that Friday. I'd left my romantic poetry anthology sprawled open on the reading table while I grabbed coffee from the kitchen. The service passage was faster than going around, though the walls pressed close enough that I had to turn sideways at certain points. The air tasted different in those corridors, metallic, like pennies left too long in a pocket. When I returned, my book sat closed at a perfect right angle to the table's edge, aligned with mathematical precision. A slip of cream paper marked my page, the kind of heavy stock that belonged to another century, written in copperplate script. The gentleman is running late. My coffee went cold as I stared at those 4 words. The handwriting was immaculate, each letter formed with mechanical perfection. I asked the other students if someone had moved my book. They looked at me with the particular blend of pity and confusion reserved for foreigners who don't understand local customs. That night, I couldn't focus on my essay about Coleridge's opium visions. The reading room felt different. Not emptier, but fuller somehow, as if the air had thickened with expectation. At 11:30, I packed my things to leave. At 11:45, I unpacked them again, drawn by curiosity that overruled common sense. At midnight exactly, the smell hit me. Silver polish, sharp and chemical, mixing with the waxy scent of shoe grease. It rolled through the reading room in waves, so strong I could taste it on my tongue. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. My breath clouded in front of my face, and frost began forming on the inside of the windows, spreading in fractal patterns that looked almost like writing. Then I saw him again. Not a glimpse this time, but a full view as he emerged from the wall near the fireplace. The same tailcoat, pristine despite passing through solid stone. The same white gloves, which he adjusted with practiced precision. His face remained shadowed beneath a servant's dignity, features suggested rather than seen. He moved through the room with purpose, straightening books that weren't crooked, adjusting chairs that didn't need adjusting, maintaining order in a space already ordered. I tried to speak, but my throat constricted. The figure paused at my table, and though I couldn't see his eyes, I felt their weight. He reached past me, close enough that I should have felt body heat, air displacement, something, and repositioned my notebook a quarter-inch to the left. Then he continued his circuit of the room before disappearing into the wall opposite where he'd emerged. The frost melted instantly, leaving condensation that dripped like tears down the windows. The chemical smell faded, replaced by the room's usual must. My notebook bore a thumbprint in the leather cover that hadn't been there before, pressed so deep it would never fade. I spent the next day in the archives, hunting through architectural drawings and historical records. The 1890 map revealed what I'd suspected. A servants' corridor had once run behind that wall, connecting the main chimney to what had been the servants' quarters. Walled up during renovations in 1923, according to a brief note in the margins. No explanation why. The inventory ledgers proved more interesting. Dating back to the college's founding, they tracked books, furniture, silverware, anything of value. Most entries were signed with full names, but starting in 1891, a new signature appeared. H.E. Just initials, always in that same copper-plate hand. The entries continued monthly at first, then annually, always on November 5th. The most recent entry was dated 3 weeks ago. I cross-referenced the initials with employment records. Nothing. The staff directory for 1890-1892 had been torn out, leaving only frayed edges and speculation. But I found something else. A photograph from 1889. The senior staff posed stiffly in the main hall. In the background, slightly out of focus, stood a figure in servant's livery. The exposure was too poor to make out features, but the posture was unmistakable. That same rigid perfection, that same sense of waiting. The next midnight, I was ready. I'd positioned mirrors to cover blind spots, set up my phone to record, even sprinkled flour on the floor to capture footprints. The smell arrived on schedule. Silver polish, shoe grease, and something else I hadn't noticed before. Mothballs, formaldehyde, the preservatives of another era. He materialized differently this time, not from the wall but assembling himself from shadows that shouldn't have been there. The flour remained undisturbed as he moved through it. The mirrors showed only empty room where he stood. My phone screen flickered and died, though the battery had been full. This time he spoke, not with his mouth. I still couldn't see his face clearly, but his voice filled my skull like water flooding a basement. Standards must be maintained. The words weren't English, weren't any language I recognized, but I understood them perfectly. They came with images. The reading room in different eras, students in different fashions, but always the same disorder. Books left carelessly, chairs pushed back, human chaos interrupting the perfect order he'd been tasked to maintain. You leave things unfinished. My essay on Coleridge lay on the table, half-written, abandoned for my investigation. He moved toward it, and I saw his hands clearly for the first time. The white gloves were part of him, not clothing, but skin bleached to fabric whiteness. The fingers bent in too many places. I grabbed my essay, clutching it against my chest. He stopped, tilted his head at an angle that necks shouldn't achieve. the shadows where his face should be shifted, suggesting features that rearranged themselves when I tried to focus on them. The gentleman is always late. The gentleman never finishes. The gentleman disturbs the order. Each word came with a stabbing pain behind my eyes. Memories that weren't mine bleeding through. A young man in 1891, proud of his position, maintaining the estate with devotion that bordered on obsession. The typhoid outbreak. The fever dreams where the walls dissolved and duty remained. The choice, if it had been a choice, to continue serving. The room spun, or I spun, or time itself spun backward. I saw the reading room as it had been. Gas lamps instead of electric, different books but the same shelves. I saw the servants' corridor before it was sealed, saw him walking it endlessly, polishing silver that gleamed in candlelight. I saw the wall being built, brick by brick, while something that had been human stood on the other side, still trying to complete its rounds. November 5th. Always November 5th. The last day of proper service. The pain intensified, and I understood. Every November 5th, he managed to sign the inventory. Every November 5th, for one day, the boundary thinned enough for him to mark his continued service. The rest of the year, he could only watch, only maintain what order he could from his side of reality. But I'd seen him, acknowledged him, and that had given him strength. The room fractured. I existed in multiple versions simultaneously. The modern reading room, the Victorian original, and somewhere else entirely. A space between walls that had never been built, where service continued eternally, where silver never tarnished because it was polished constantly, where books arranged themselves by a logic that predated the alphabet. He stood closer now, close enough that I could see through the shadows to what lay beneath, a face that was all faces, every student who'd ever left a book out of place, every person who'd disrupted his perfect order. He was adding my features to the collection. I ran, not through the door. I couldn't remember where the door was, but through the service passage that shouldn't have been there. The walls pressed closer than before, close enough that I had to exhale to fit through. The metallic taste grew stronger, mixing with something organic and wrong. Behind me, or ahead, or beside, direction meant nothing here. I heard the measured pace of perfectly polished shoes. The passage opened into the kitchen, though it wasn't the kitchen I knew. Copper pots hung from hooks, polished to mirror brightness. A fire crackled in a hearth that had been electric since the 50s. And there, at the servants' table, sat 3 figures in identical tailcoats. They looked up as I stumbled in, their faces blurred like the photograph from 1889. "He's late," they said in unison. "The gentleman is always late." I backed away, but the passage had closed behind me. The kitchen stretched impossibly, its corners receding into architectural impossibility. The figures stood, moved toward me with that same perfect synchronization. Their white gloves left no prints on the surfaces they touched. Then, suddenly, daylight. I was lying on the reading room floor, my essay on Coleridge scattered around me. Morning sun streamed through windows free of frost. A concerned librarian was shaking my shoulder, asking if I was all right, if I'd been there all night. I told her I'd fallen asleep studying. She tutted about students pushing themselves too hard, helped gather my papers. Everything was normal, mundane, real, except for the note in my pocket, the one I didn't remember receiving. Cream paper, copperplate script, service resumes, November 5th. The gentleman will be punctual. I changed rooms that day, moved to the modern dormitory wing with its concrete walls and fluorescent lights. But it didn't matter. Every midnight I smell silver polish and shoe grease. Every mirror reflects shadows that shouldn't be there. And sometimes when I leave books on my desk, they rearrange themselves in the night, aligned to perfect right angles. I've started doing it myself now, arranging things just so, maintaining order. It's easier than fighting. My handwriting has improved, become more precise, more copperplate. Yesterday, I caught myself adjusting my roommate's notebooks while he slept, positioning them at exact right angles to the desk edge. November 5th is tomorrow. I've been practicing my signature, making it perfect. The inventory ledger is waiting in the archive, and I know, somehow I know, that there will be a fresh page. 2 signatures this year. H.E., and whatever initials I choose to become. The service passages call to me now. I walk them at night, learning their geometry, their impossible turns and connections. Sometimes I see him, or them, or us. The distinction blurs. We nod to each other with professional courtesy. We understand the importance of standards. My roommate says I've been talking in my sleep, but not in English. He says it sounds older, formal, like something from a period drama. He says I've been getting up at midnight, standing at perfect attention by the door, waiting. He's wrong about one thing, though. I'm not waiting. I'm practicing. Tomorrow is November 5th, and the gentleman must never be late. Story 11. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour gas station hummed like dying insects, casting everything in that particular shade of yellow that makes human skin look diseased. It was 2:47 a.m. according to my dashboard clock, somewhere along Route 287 in Nebraska. One of those stretches where the darkness presses against the windows like it's trying to get in. I'd been driving for 16 hours straight, hauling a load of refrigerated goods to Denver. The kind of run where you start seeing things in your peripheral vision, where the white lines begin to writhe like snakes if you stare at them too long. That's what I told myself when I first saw her. She was standing by pump 3 when I pulled in, though I hadn't seen her arrive. No car nearby. Just this woman with tangled red hair that hung in wet-looking clumps, wearing what might have once been a white dress but now looked like something dredged from a riverbed. Gray-brown stains spreading across the fabric like continents on a ruined map. The way she stood there, perfectly still, arms hanging loose at her sides, made my teeth ache. I needed fuel and coffee, simple transaction. Get in, get out, keep moving. That's the trucker's mantra for these dead-hour stops. But when I walked past her toward the store's entrance, she turned her head to follow me. Not her body, just her head, rotating smooth and slow like it was on a swivel. Her mouth hung slightly open, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too small. The automatic doors wheezed open. I grabbed an energy drink and a packaged sandwich that looked about as appetizing as cardboard, paid the half-asleep attendant who didn't even look up from his phone, and turned to leave. She was pressed against the glass doors, not standing in front of them, pressed against them, her body flattened against the surface, like she was trying to merge with it. Her palms were splayed wide, leaving greasy prints on the glass. Her face was mashed against the door at an angle that should have been painful, one eye bulging as it stared directly at me. The automatic sensor should have triggered, should have opened the doors, but they remained sealed. I stopped 3 feet away. The attendant hadn't noticed, still scrolling through his phone with the dedication of the truly bored. The woman's mouth moved, forming words without sound. Her breath fogged the glass in irregular patches that reminded me of mold growth patterns. Something about those patches made my skin crawl. They weren't dispersing like normal breath fog. They were spreading, creating shapes. 3 curved lines that looked almost like hair. Wet hair, pressed against glass. I backed away considering the emergency exit, but then she suddenly jerked backward, stumbling away from the doors like she'd been pulled by invisible strings. The doors immediately sensed my approach and slid open with their characteristic wheeze. She stood there in the harsh parking lot light, swaying slightly, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. As I walked past, maintaining as much distance as possible, she reached out one pale hand toward me. Her fingers were too long with too many joints. I ran the last 10 feet to my truck. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. The cab of my Peterbilt had never felt more like sanctuary. I locked the doors, started the engine, and was pulling away when I heard it. A wet slapping sound against the passenger window. She was there, trying to force her arm through the tilting ventilation window I'd left cracked open. Her arm bent in ways that shouldn't have been possible, joints popping and reforming as she tried to squeeze through the 4-inch gap. Then the lights, red and blue, cutting through the darkness. A state trooper had pulled into the station. The woman immediately withdrew her arm and walked. No, flowed, away from my truck. moving with that horrible liquid grace toward the shadows at the edge of the lot. The officer stepped out, looked around, saw nothing unusual. Just another quiet night at a highway gas station. I should have left then. Should have hit the accelerator and not stopped until Denver. But I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. My truck was equipped with internal cameras, insurance company requirement, including one that covered the passenger side. I pulled up the footage on my tablet. The timestamp showed 2:51 a.m. There I was, clear as day, backing away from something at the passenger window. But the window showed only darkness. No woman. No arm. Nothing. Except... wait. I zoomed in on the window's reflection. The reflection showed her perfectly. That matted red hair, the stained dress, the grotesque reaching arm. But when I looked at the direct footage, at what should have been her actual body, there was only empty air. She existed solely in the reflection, like she was trapped in the glass itself, reaching through from some other place that mirrors could see but cameras couldn't. My stomach turned to ice water. I rewound further, to the gas station footage. There, in the glass door's reflection, she was clear and horrible. But in the direct view, I was backing away from nothing, looking terrified of empty space. The attendant must have thought I was having some kind of episode. I drove through the rest of the night and into the dawn, my eyes constantly flicking to the mirrors. Every reflective surface became suspect. The side mirrors, the rear view, even the polished chrome of the dashboard instruments. Sometimes I thought I saw movement in them that didn't match the world outside. A flash of red that shouldn't be there. Pale fingers pressed against glass that wasn't really there. 3 days later, I was in Colorado, then Wyoming, then Montana. Different loads, different routes, but always moving. I convinced myself it had been exhaustion, maybe contaminated food from some truck stop, a hallucination brought on by too many hours staring at asphalt. The mind plays tricks when you push it too hard. Every long-haul driver knows that. But then Rapid City happened, another 24-hour station, another 3 a.m. fuel stop. I'd been careful, only stopping during daylight, only at busy locations. But I'd miscalculated my fuel, and it was either stop here or risk running empty on a stretch of nothing. The station was modern, well lit, multiple cameras everywhere. Safe. I'd just finished fueling when I noticed the fog on my windshield. It was a clear, dry night. No reason for condensation. But there it was, spreading across the glass from the outside. As I watched, frozen in place, the fog formed a pattern. 3 semicircular smears, perfectly spaced, like someone had pressed wet hair against the glass and pulled it away. I lunged for the cab, slammed the door, and grabbed my camera to check the footage. This time, I was ready. This time, I'd have proof. The external camera showed my truck clearly. The windshield was clean, completely clear. But in the reflection on the hood, in that dark, polished surface, I could see her. She was standing on the hood of my truck, bent forward at an impossible angle, her wet hair dragging across the windshield. Her face was inches from the glass, mouth open in what might have been a scream or a laugh. Her eyes were focused on something inside the cab. On me. I switched to the internal camera, the one facing the windshield from inside. The glass showed nothing but the empty parking lot beyond. But in the reflection of my own eyes, wide with terror on the screen, I could see her clearly. She was inside the reflection, existing in that thin space between glass and reality, pressing closer and closer to the surface that separated us. That was a week ago. I've stopped checking the cameras. What's the point when she only exists in the spaces between? In the reflections of reflections, in the peripheral vision of mirrors, in the fog patterns that appear on glass when no fog should exist. I've covered every reflective surface in my cab with duct tape, but I still feel her presence, still hear the wet sound of hair dragging across glass in the moments before sleep. The other drivers at the truck stops have started avoiding me. They see me talking to empty air, backing away from nothing, covering mirrors like a madman. The dispatcher has mentioned I seem stressed, suggested I take some time off. But I can't stop moving. Motion is the only thing that keeps her at bay. keeps her from fully manifesting in whatever reflection she's trying to break through. Last night, I made a mistake. I dozed off at a rest stop outside Billings, just for a moment. When I woke, the inside of every window was covered in condensation, impossible in the bone-dry Montana air. And in that condensation, drawn from inside but somehow appearing reversed, were words. You see me. I see you seeing me. The glass is thinning. Below the words were hundreds of those 3 semicircle patterns, overlapping and interweaving like scales, like wet hair pressed against every surface, like she was surrounding me in the reflected world, waiting for the moment when the barrier finally breaks. I'm writing this at a truck stop in North Dakota. It's 3:33 a.m. I've been awake for 52 hours. In the black screen of my turned-off phone, I can see her standing behind me, even though I know the lot is empty. She's closer now than she's ever been. Her reflection is more solid, more real, while I feel myself becoming translucent, like I'm the one fading into the background. The fog is forming on the windows again. This time, it's on the inside. This time, when I check the cameras, I wonder what I'll see. Will she finally be in the real world, captured in direct footage? Or will I be the one who only exists in reflections, trapped in that thin space between glass and reality, reaching through to a world I can no longer touch? The glass is cracking. Not the actual glass. That remains perfect, unbroken. But somewhere between the reflection and the reality, something is splintering. I can hear it, like ice breaking under spring sun, like mirrors shattering in reverse. She's not trying to break through anymore. She's trying to pull me in. And the worst part, the part that makes me question everything, is that when I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the chrome of the door handle an hour ago, just for a split second, my hair looked red, wet, tangled, 3 semicircles in the fog. Maybe she was never the one in the reflection. Maybe I've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe I'm already on the other side of the glass and I just haven't realized it yet. Story 12. The bus lurched to a stop at 3rd and Madison, its pneumatic brakes hissing like something wounded. I stepped off into the pre-dawn darkness, that dead hour when the city holds its breath between night and morning. The streetlights cast their sodium glow in perfect circles on the wet pavement, and I started my usual 20-minute walk home, collar turned up against the October chill. That's when I first saw them. The SUVs with purple balloons. 3 black vehicles crawled along the opposite side of the street, their windows tinted so dark they might as well have been painted. But it was the balloons that made my steps falter. Clusters of them, deep purple like bruised flesh, tied to the side mirrors and bobbing in the windless air with a motion that seemed almost deliberate. The lead vehicle's high beams swept across storefronts like searchlights, and I heard, or thought I heard, children's laughter filtering through the closed windows. I kept walking, faster now, my work boots clicking against concrete. The SUVs turned at the next intersection, disappearing from view, and I told myself they were probably just returning from some late-night party. Rich kids, maybe, or a bachelor party with a twisted sense of humor. The explanation felt thin even as I constructed it, but I clung to it anyway. 2 blocks later, they were back. This time on my side of the street, creeping along behind me at walking pace. The balloon scraped against parked cars with a sound like fingernails on silk. I could hear the engines now, low, patient rumbles that seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity. My apartment was still 15 blocks away. Too far to run without looking like prey, another person appeared ahead of me, emerging from the 24-hour pharmacy with a plastic bag clutched in one hand. Middle-aged, wearing a reflective vest that marked him as another night shift worker heading home. He glanced at the SUVs, then at me, and I saw my own unease mirrored in his eyes. Without speaking, we both understood. We turned simultaneously into the narrow alley between the pharmacy and a shuttered print shop. The vehicles stopped, engines idling, waiting. We pressed ourselves behind a wooden fence that separated the alley from a small parking area, our breathing shallow and synchronized. Through the slats, I could see the lead SUV's headlights painting long shadows on the alley walls. The balloons continued their hypnotic dance, and now I was certain they were moving against the wind, pulling toward the alley entrance like dogs straining at invisible leashes. Then came the counting. A voice, high and sing-song, drifted from one of the vehicles. 1, 2, 3, each number stretched out, savored like candy dissolving on a tongue. My companion grabbed my wrist, his fingers ice-cold through my jacket. We held our position, muscles cramping as the count continued. 4, 5, 6. The headlights swept across our hiding spot, and for one terrible moment, I was certain they could see through the fence, see our cowering forms pressed against rotting wood and damp brick. The light lingered, pulsing slightly as if breathing. 7, 8, 9. A long pause. The other man's grip tightened to the point of pain. 10, ready or not? The engines roared to life. Tires squealed. The SUVs shot forward down the street, their balloon clusters streaming behind them like toxic exhaust. We stayed frozen for another full minute before stumbling out of the alley on trembling legs. The other man mumbled something, thanks maybe, or a prayer, and hurried off in the opposite direction. I never saw him again. I practically ran the remaining blocks home, keys already in my hand 3 buildings away. My apartment building's security door had never looked so welcoming. I yanked it open, stumbled inside, and 3 purple balloons bobbed against my apartment door, tied to the handle with silver ribbon. My blood turned to slush. The hallway stretched impossibly long, the fluorescent lights humming their electric anxiety. I approached slowly, each step deliberate and measured as if the floor might give way. The balloons turned lazily as I got closer, and I saw something written on them in white marker. 3 words, 1 per balloon. Found you first. I stood there for a long time, maybe minutes, maybe an hour, just staring at those words. The hallway remained empty, silent except for the buzz of lights and the whisper of latex against latex as the balloons touched. Finally, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I untied them from my door handle. They felt wrong, too heavy, as if filled with something denser than helium. I carried them inside, shut the door, and triple-checked the locks. Sleep was impossible. I sat in my living room with every light on, watching the balloons hover near my ceiling. They didn't drift the way balloons should. They held their position precisely, rotating slowly to keep their messages facing me. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion finally won, and I dozed off in my chair. I woke to sunlight streaming through my windows and immediately looked up. Only 1 balloon remained, hovering lower now, half deflated and struggling to stay airborne. The other 2 were nowhere, not on the floor, not caught in a corner, simply gone. The remaining balloon had descended to eye level, its found message wrinkled, but still legible. That's when I noticed my doorbell's indicator light blinking. My building had one of those video doorbell systems, the kind that records whenever someone presses the button or triggers the motion sensor. I pulled up the app on my phone with trembling fingers and checked the overnight footage. 3:47 a.m. Motion detected. The hallway was empty, but the camera had activated. 3:48 a.m. Motion detected. Still empty. 3:49 a.m. Motion detected. Empty. This continued for 17 consecutive minutes, the camera triggering over and over with nothing visible in frame. Then, at 4:04 a.m., the doorbell itself was pressed. The video showed the button depressing on its own, holding for a full 30 seconds. The audio picked up breathing, long, careful inhalations and exhalations, perfectly rhythmic like someone practicing meditation or trying to stay calm. I scrolled to the next event. 4:15 a.m. The doorbell pressed again. This time, a whisper accompanied the breathing. 1, 2, 3. My phone slipped from numb fingers. The remaining balloon had drifted closer while I watched the footage, now floating directly beside my head. I could smell it. Latex and something else. Something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. When I turned to look at it directly, I saw my reflection in its purple surface, distorted and multiplied into a dozen warped versions of my face. I grabbed the balloon and yanked it toward the window, intending to release it. But the moment my skin made contact with the latex, images flooded my mind. Not memories, I was certain of that, but something else. Visions, maybe, or transmissions. A room full of people standing perfectly still, purple balloons tied to their wrists, their eyes reflecting that same deep purple color. The counting voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. SUVs circling city blocks in perfect synchronization, gathering those who walk alone in the small hours. A game that never ends, where being found means becoming a seeker, where hiding only delays the inevitable. I jerked my hand away, gasping. The balloon bobbed gently, innocently, its message now reading differently in the morning light. Not a threat, an invitation. The next 3 days passed in a haze of insomnia and paranoia. I called in sick to work, unable to face the prospect of another late-night bus ride. I kept checking the doorbell footage obsessively. Every night brought new recordings, breathing, counting, sometimes what sounded like multiple voices whispering in harmony. But the hallway remained empty in every frame. On the 4th night, I cracked. I needed groceries, needed to feel normal air on my skin, needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I ventured out just after sunset, hood up, moving quickly through familiar streets. The store was blessedly normal, fluorescent lights, music, other shoppers going about their ordinary lives. I loaded my cart with enough supplies for another week of hiding. Walking back, bags clutched in both hands, I heard it before I saw it. The distinctive rumble of multiple engines, the scrape of latex against metal. The SUVs rounded the corner in formation, purple balloons streaming like a parade of nightmares. But this time, they weren't alone. People walked alongside them. Dozens of people, all moving in perfect synchronization. Men, women, all ages, all wearing the blank expression of sleepwalkers. Purple ribbons were tied around their wrists, connecting them to the vehicles like leashed pets. As they passed under streetlights, I saw their eyes, filmed over with a purple sheen that made them look like deep-sea creatures dragged to the surface. One of them turned to look at me. A woman in a business suit, her face familiar though I couldn't place from where. She smiled, lips moving soundlessly, and I read the words. Ready or not. I ran. Dropped my groceries and ran like I've never run before, my lungs burning, legs pumping, the sound of synchronized footsteps growing behind me. Or maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe there was nothing there. Maybe I was sprinting through empty streets while concerned citizens watched from their windows. I made it home, slammed through the security door, and took the stairs 3 at a time. My apartment door stood open. Not forced, not broken, simply open, as if I'd never locked it at all. Purple light spilled from inside, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I stood in that hallway for a long time, weighing my options. Run again? To where? Call the police? And tell them what? That party balloons were terrorizing me? That SUVs were playing hide and seek? That my doorbell was recording ghosts? Finally, inevitably, I stepped inside. My living room was full of them. Purple balloons covering every surface, hundreds of them. Their ribbons creating a silver web across my floor. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with that purple light, and I realized it was coming from inside the balloons, each one glowing like a paper lantern. The air was thick with that organic smell, so strong now that I had to breathe through my mouth. In the center of the room, cleared of furniture, someone had arranged the balloons to spell out words on my floor. The game continues your it. The last balloon I'd kept, the one reading found, still floated near my ceiling, but now it pulsed in rhythm with the others, part of some vast network I couldn't begin to understand. As I watched, it descended slowly, deliberately, until it hovered at eye level. When I looked into its surface this time, I didn't see my reflection. I saw myself from outside, from above, from angles that made no sense. I saw myself walking to work yesterday, except I hadn't gone to work. I saw myself at the grocery store an hour ago, but in the vision, I was selecting items I hadn't bought. having conversations with people who weren't there. I saw myself sleeping in my bed while simultaneously standing in my living room, existing in two places at once, or perhaps in no place at all. The breathing from the doorbell recordings filled the room, though no one else was there. Or maybe I was the one breathing. It was getting harder to tell. The purple light pulsed faster, the balloons swaying in their hypnotic dance, and I felt something inside me responding to their rhythm. My own breath syncing with that careful inhalation and exhalation. My heartbeat aligning with the pulse of purple light. I heard myself counting, though my lips weren't moving. 1, 2, 3. The words came from somewhere deeper than speech, rising from some hollow place I hadn't known existed. The balloons responded, clustering together, forming shapes that almost made sense. Faces, perhaps, or maps, or instructions written in a language that bypassed words entirely. 4, 5, 6. Through my window I could see the SUVs assembled on the street below, waiting. The purple-eyed people stood in perfect rows, their faces turned up toward my apartment, all of them smiling, all of them counting in perfect unison with the voice that might or might not have been mine. 7, 8, 9. The single balloon, found, pressed against my face like a kiss, and I understood then that the game had never been about hiding or seeking. It was about something else entirely, something that existed in the space between sleeping and waking, between real and imagined, between the counter and the counted. 10. The purple light exploded into brilliance, and for a moment I saw everything. The city from above, mapped in purple light, thousands of balloons drifting through the streets, like antibodies through a bloodstream. I saw the players, the seekers, the found, all part of some vast pattern that pulsed with its own alien logic. I saw myself among them, had always been among them, would always be among them. Then darkness, silence, the normal incandescent glow of my ceiling fixture. My living room was empty, no balloons, no purple light, no evidence of intrusion. My groceries sat neatly on my kitchen counter, though I had no memory of retrieving them. The doorbell app showed no recordings from the past week. My work called to ask if I was feeling better, mentioning how concerned they'd been when I'd collapsed on the bus 4 days ago, how the paramedics had said it was just exhaustion, how I should take all the time I needed to recover. But when I looked in the mirror, my eyes caught the light strangely. And sometimes, late at night, I hear counting that might be my neighbor's television, or might be something else. The SUVs still cruise the empty streets in those small hours. I see them from my window, their purple balloons bobbing in the darkness. They don't stop at my building anymore. They don't need to, because sometimes, without deciding to, I find myself getting dressed at 3 a.m. I find myself walking to the door, hand on the knob, listening to my own breathing, long, careful, measured. I find myself counting 1, 2, 3, and each time I stop at 9. So far, I always stop at 9, but the number 10 waits in my throat like a balloon ready to burst, and I know that one night, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now, I'll finish the count. I'll open the door. I'll join the others in their synchronized steps, purple ribbon tied around my wrist, searching the empty streets for those who still think they can hide. The game continues. We're all it. We always have been. Story 13. The first message came through at 2:47 a.m., right after I'd clutched a ranked match on Siege. My hands were still trembling from the adrenaline when the friend request popped up on my screen, accompanied by that soft chime that would later haunt my dreams. GG. You play like you've got nothing to lose. I accepted without thinking. That's what you do after a good match. You add the decent players, build your roster. The username was generic enough, ShadowSync91. We'd been on the same team, and he'd covered my 6 during a crucial push. Standard gaming etiquette demanded reciprocation. Over the next few weeks, our late-night sessions became routine. His voice through the headset was pleasant enough, deep, measured, with a slight delay that I attributed to connection lag. He asked the usual questions at first: favorite loadouts, preferred operators, thoughts on the latest patch. But gradually, the conversation shifted. He wanted to know what I did for work, if I lived alone, what I ordered when I got takeout during marathon sessions. The red flag started small. He'd mentioned things I hadn't told him, like knowing I'd ordered Thai food when I'd only said I was grabbing dinner, or commenting on the construction noise from my neighbor's renovation when I hadn't mentioned it. I brushed it off. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe the mic picked up background noise. The mind creates convenient explanations when the alternative feels impossible. Then came the emotional manipulation. If I logged off early, messages would flood my inbox about how gaming was all he had, how I was the only real friend he'd made online. The guilt worked for a while. I'd log back in, play another few rounds, ignore the exhaustion creeping into my bones. But when I finally started setting boundaries, telling him I needed space, that's when the deliveries began. The first was a pizza at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Large pepperoni, extra cheese, exactly what I usually ordered, down to the garlic sauce on the side. The delivery driver said it was prepaid, no name given. I ate it anyway, convinced it was a glitch in some app system. The second was a bouquet of white lilies, funeral flowers, left on my doorstep with no note. The third was an empty Amazon box, with my name written in careful block letters on every surface, inside and out, like someone had spent hours making sure I'd see it from every angle. I blocked ShadowSync 91 immediately, changed my privacy settings, made my profiles invisible, even considered deleting everything and starting fresh. But within hours, he was back. New gamer tag, your street 1247. My address. My actual address, scrambled just enough to avoid automatic detection. The next username was my apartment number mixed with my zip code. Then variations of my building's name. Each time I blocked him, he'd return within minutes, always finding me in ranked matches, always on the opposite team now. He'd hunt me specifically, ignore objectives to track me down, moving through the maps with impossible precision, like he could see through walls. I stopped playing for a week. The deliveries continued. Chinese food I hadn't ordered, a singing telegram at 3 a.m. that woke the entire floor, a locksmith who insisted I'd called about changing my locks, showing me a work order with my signature, except I'd been at work when it was supposedly signed. Then came the envelope. It was slipped under my door while I slept, no postmark, no return address. Inside were printouts, screenshots of every purchase I'd made on the gaming marketplace for the past year. Skins, battle passes, DLC content, transaction IDs, timestamps, payment methods all perfectly documented. At the bottom, a handwritten note in the same block letters as the Amazon box. Cartão sem contactless, boa escolha, Portuguese. Card without contactless? Good choice. I'd disabled Tap to Pay on all my cards months ago after reading about RFID skimming. How could he possibly know that? My hands shook as I called building security. They pulled the hallway footage from the night before, and that's when things stopped making sense entirely. The video showed a man walking down my hallway at 3:42 a.m. Normal gait, average height, baseball cap pulled low. He bent down at my door, slipped something underneath, and walked away. Nothing unusual, except for one detail that made my skin crawl. The timestamp on the video read 3:47 a.m. I made them replay it 3 times. Each time, the same thing. The timestamp showed 5 minutes into the future from when the events on screen were happening. The security guard shrugged, said their system had been glitchy lately, probably needed a reset. But when I checked my phone, comparing the times, the math didn't add up. The envelope had been there when I woke up at 6 a.m. The video showed 3:47 a.m., but according to the motion logs, the event had triggered at 3:42 a.m. 5 minutes ahead. Always 5 minutes ahead. I had them pull more footage. Every delivery, every incident. The pattern was consistent. The timestamp ran 5 minutes fast, but only for him. Other residents appeared normal, their movements matching the clock. But whenever he appeared, time seemed to skip, like the camera was seeing something that hadn't happened yet, or had happened in a space between moments. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake listening to every creak in the building, checking my phone obsessively, refreshing security apps I'd panicked downloaded. I installed my own camera, one of those smart doorbells everyone has now. For 3 nights, nothing. Then on the 4th night, motion detected at 4:15 a.m. I watched the notification pop up in real time, fumbled for my phone, opened the app. The live stream showed my hallway, empty. But the recorded clip, the one automatically saved from 5 seconds before the motion trigger, that showed him. Standing at my door, not moving, not delivering anything, just standing there, head tilted slightly like he was listening. The timestamp, 4:20 a.m. I scrambled to my door, looked through the peephole. Empty hallway. Checked the app again. The live stream still showed nothing. But the recorded clips kept coming, each one 5 minutes in the future, showing him standing there, getting closer to the door in each successive clip, until in the last one, his face was pressed against the peephole from the outside, eye wide and unblinking, looking directly at the camera, looking at me. I jerked back from the door, heart hammering, checked the peephole again. Nothing. But my phone kept buzzing with new clips, and in each one he was inside now. Inside my apartment. Standing in my living room in one. Sitting at my gaming setup in another. In the final clip, time-stamped 5 minutes from now, he was standing directly behind where I was currently crouched by the door. I spun around. Empty apartment. Just me and the shadows thrown by the city lights through my windows. But the feeling persisted. That sensation of being watched, of someone breathing just outside your peripheral vision, of a presence that exists in the spaces between seconds. My phone buzzed again. A message on the gaming app from a new username. 5 minutes ahead. You can't block time. I ran. Grabbed my keys and ran, taking the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the night air like a drowning man breaking the surface. I sat in my car until dawn, watching the apartment building, waiting for him to emerge. He never did. The security footage from that night shows me leaving in a panic at 4:25 a.m. It also shows me still in my apartment at 4:30 a.m., sitting at my computer, playing games, my character moving with perfect precision through maps I'd never seen before. I haven't been back. I'm staying at a motel 40 miles outside the city, paying cash, no electronics except this laptop I bought secondhand. But even here, things feel wrong. The timestamps on my files keep jumping. Emails show as received before they were sent. This document claims it was last modified tomorrow. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing it. If the stress and isolation of too many late-night gaming sessions finally cracked something inside me. But then I remember that video, that impossible 5-minute gap, and I know something is fundamentally wrong with reality itself. Or maybe that's what madness feels like, being absolutely certain that time itself has turned against you. Last night I broke down and checked my old gaming account from this laptop. One message waiting, from 2 days in the future. I'm not 5 minutes ahead. You're 5 minutes behind. You have been since that first match. Watch the replay. I did. Found that first match where we met, downloaded the replay file. Watched myself play, watched him cover me during that crucial push. But there was something wrong with my character's movement. A 5-second delay between my inputs and my character's actions. Imperceptible during live play, hidden by the adrenaline and chaos but obvious in replay. 5 seconds that had somehow become 5 minutes, then 5 hours, now 5 days. I checked the date on my laptop, then my phone, then the motel's lobby computer. They all show different times, different days, some past, some future. I no longer know when now is. The timestamp on this file says it was created next week. The modification date is 3 months ago. Maybe he was right. Maybe you can't block time, but you can fall out of sync with it. And once you do, once you slip between the seconds, you realize that's where he's been all along. Not stalking through space, but through time itself. Existing in those 5-minute gaps, those spaces between timestamps, those moments that haven't happened yet but already have. I see him sometimes now, in my peripheral vision. 5 minutes ahead, or 5 minutes behind. I can no longer tell. Walking through walls that won't exist for another few moments. Sitting in chairs that were there yesterday. Having conversations with versions of me that haven't happened yet. The motel clerk just knocked on my door, asking about the noise complaint from the room next to mine. But I'm in the last room on this floor. There is no room next to mine. Not yet. Not for another 5 minutes. Story 14. The knock came at 2:47 a.m. 3 soft taps, 2 heavy thuds, a pause, then the sequence repeated. I'd been lying awake in my sleeper cab for the past hour, watching condensation form intricate patterns on the windshield, trying to ignore the growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with this truck stop. I was green, only 3 weeks solo after getting my CDL. The electronic logbook had forced me off the road 2 exits early when my hours ran out. The place I'd pulled into looked abandoned even in daylight, but at night it transformed into something else entirely. Cracked asphalt stretched beneath sodium lights that buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly amber glow that made the shadows seem to breathe. The knocking pattern continued. I knew the game. Every rookie did. They tell you about it at truck stops, whispered warnings between sips of burnt coffee. The lot lizards, the desperate ones, the dangerous ones. They all had their patterns, their codes, but this felt different. The rhythm was too precise, too deliberate, like someone following a script they'd memorized down to the microsecond. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the rivets in the metal, anything to avoid looking toward the window. The fabric curtains I'd installed were thin, a mistake I'd been meaning to correct, and I could see the suggestion of movement outside, a shadow that shouldn't be there, given where the lights were positioned. The knocking stopped. I exhaled slowly, unclenching muscles I hadn't realized were tight. My phone showed 2:51 a.m., 4 minutes of that rhythmic torture. I reached for my water bottle, throat suddenly parched, when the knocking resumed, this time on the passenger side. The exact same pattern. 3 soft, 2 heavy, pause, repeat. My rig was parked between 2 other trucks, both dark and silent. The gap between vehicles was maybe 3 feet. To move from driver's side to passengers in those 4 minutes of silence, someone would have had to squeeze through that narrow space or walk all the way around, at least 30 yards in either direction. I turned my head slowly toward the passenger window. Through the thin curtain, a shape stood perfectly still, human-sized, but wrong somehow in its proportions. The shoulders too narrow, the head tilted at an angle that made my neck ache in sympathy. The knocking stopped again. This time I watched, counting seconds on my phone. At exactly 4 minutes, the pattern resumed on the driver's side. I whipped my head around, catching a glimpse of the same figure, or what looked like the same figure, through the driver's side curtain. Same unnatural tilt of the head, same narrow shoulders. It wasn't possible. The timing was wrong, the physics were wrong, unless there were 2 of them. But even that didn't explain the identical posture, the synchronized movements. I grabbed my CB radio, hands shaking slightly as I turned to channel 19. Static filled the cab, punctuated by distant conversations too garbled to understand. I keyed the mic, throat tight. But what would I say? That someone was knocking on my door? That I was scared? The other drivers would laugh me off the channel. The knocking pattern changed. Now it came from above, on the roof of my cab. Same rhythm, but the sound was different against the metal up there. Hollow, resonant. It seemed to travel through the frame of the truck, making the whole vehicle hum at a frequency that set my teeth on edge. I forced myself to think rationally. Someone was messing with me, hazing the rookie. It had to be that simple. But the precision of it, the impossibility of the movements, my mind kept circling back to those problems like a tongue finding a sore tooth. The overhead knocking stopped. Silence stretched out, broken only by the distant hum of a refrigerated trailer somewhere in the lot. I waited, counting. 4 minutes passed, then 5, 6. At 7 minutes, I started to relax. Maybe they'd given up, moved on to easier prey. I reached for my phone to check the time again when something scraped against the undercarriage of my truck. Not a knock this time. A slow, deliberate dragging sound like someone pulling themselves along the asphalt beneath me. The sound traveled from the front of the truck toward the back, stopping somewhere near the rear wheels. I grabbed my flashlight, a heavy mag light that doubled as a club if needed. My boots were already on. I'd learned to sleep in them at places like this. I cracked open the driver's door, letting in a rush of cold air that smelled of diesel and something else, something organic and wrong. The lot was empty as far as I could see. The other trucks sat silent, their drivers either asleep or pretending to be. I swept the flashlight beam along the ground beside my truck. Nothing. I leaned out further, checking beneath. A pale hand jerked back into the shadows under my trailer. I yanked myself back into the cab, slamming the door and locking it in one motion. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tried to process what I'd seen. The hand had been too white, almost luminescent in the brief moment my light caught it. And the fingers. Had there been too many of them? Or was that my imagination filling in details that weren't there? The engine turned over on the first try. A small mercy. I'd burn through my mandatory rest period, eat the violation, deal with the consequences later. Anything to get away from this place. As I shifted into gear, something thumped against the passenger side tire. I ignored it, focusing on navigating between the other trucks. Another thump, this time from the rear. Something was following, keeping pace with my slow crawl through the lot. I reached the exit and stopped, checking both directions on the access road, empty in both directions, just crumbling asphalt disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. As I pulled out, accelerating toward the interstate on-ramp, I heard it. A steady clicking sound, rhythmic and familiar. 3 clicks, 2 heavier clacks, pause, repeat. The sound was coming from somewhere on my truck. I pulled onto the interstate, pushing the speed up to 65, then 70. The clicking continued, unaffected by the wind or the road noise. It seemed to be coming from the passenger side, near the front wheel well. 3 exits down, I found a well-lit rest area and pulled in. Other trucks were parked here, drivers visible in their cabs. Normal. Safe. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out, legs shaky from adrenaline. I found it wedged behind the mud flap, a small digital recorder, the kind you'd buy at any electronics store. It was held in place with zip ties, playing on a loop. The speaker faced inward, toward the cab, designed to be heard from inside. I cut it free with my pocket knife, the plastic still warm to the touch despite the cold night. The recording wasn't just knocks. Between the patterns, barely audible, were whispered words. I held it close to my ear, straining to hear over the sound of idling engines. Open up. It'll be quick. The same phrase, over and over, buried in the static between knock patterns. My skin crawled. This was elaborate, planned. Someone had attached this while I was stopped, or maybe even before. How long had I been driving with this thing broadcasting its message? I was about to smash the recorder against the asphalt when I noticed something else. A small piece of fabric tucked into the step up to my cab, barely visible. I pulled it free. It was a shop rag, the kind you'd find at any truck stop, folded into a neat square. Inside was something that made my blood turn to ice water. A door alarm. The magnetic kind you'd install on a house window or door. But not just any door alarm. This one was identical to the one I'd bought last week but hadn't installed yet. Same brand, same model number visible on the side. Except I'd never taken mine out of its packaging. It was still in the supply box behind my seat. I climbed back into my cab and checked. My alarm was gone. The box was there, receipt still taped to it, but the alarm itself had vanished. Someone had been inside my truck. While I was driving, while I was sleeping. The possibilities made my stomach churn. I examined the alarm from the rag more carefully under the dome light. There was something written on the back in tiny, precise handwriting. You knocked back. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. I'd been completely still, hadn't made a sound. But then I remembered. My water bottle. When I'd reached for it, My elbow had bumped the wall of the sleeper cab. 3 times as I adjusted my position, then twice more as I settled back. 3 soft, 2 heavy. I'd answered without meaning to. The rest of the night passed in a haze of highway hypnosis. I drove until my violations would have cost me my license, then pulled into a proper truck stop, one with security cameras and bright lights and a 24-hour diner. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in a booth drinking coffee and watching the sun come up, trying to make sense of what had happened. It was only when I went to pay that I noticed the timestamp on my receipt from the previous night. The fuel I'd bought before stopping at that cursed truck stop. The date was wrong. According to the receipt, I'd bought that fuel 3 days ago. I checked my logbook. According to it, I'd been driving continuously for 72 hours. Physically impossible, legally impossible. But there it was in black and white. My routes tracked by GPS, my stops recorded. The waitress who refilled my coffee had a kind face, motherly. I wanted to ask her what day it was, but the words wouldn't come. They felt stupid, impossible. Instead, I asked if she'd seen me before. She smiled, but there was something off about it. Her eyes didn't quite focus on my face. Every night this week, hun. Same booth, same order. You really should try something besides coffee. I left cash on the table and stumbled out to my truck. The recorder was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, meaning to throw it in the trash, but stopped. The recording had changed. The knocks were still there, that same damned pattern, but the whispered words were different now. You're learning the route. I've been driving for 3 months now, or maybe 3 days, or 3 years. The receipts all show different dates. The logbook tells impossible stories. I stop at truck stops I don't remember choosing, wake up in places I didn't park, and every night, the knocking comes. 3 soft, 2 heavy, pause, repeat. Sometimes I knock back now, not because I want to, but because my body moves without my permission, completing the pattern. My knuckles are raw from it, bleeding in patterns that match the rhythm. The other drivers avoid me. I see it in how they park, always leaving empty spaces around my truck. They know something I'm only beginning to understand, that answering that first knock, even accidentally, was an invitation. To what? I'm not sure. But I'm learning the route. The recorder is still in my pocket, though I've thrown it away a dozen times. It always comes back, with new messages. The latest one is just coordinates, a truck stop I've never heard of, somewhere in the desert. My GPS can't find it, but my hands seem to know the way. I'll be there tomorrow, or yesterday. Time doesn't work right anymore, not since that night. The knock pattern has become my heartbeat, my breathing, the rhythm of my tires on the highway. 3 soft, 2 heavy, pause, repeat. I think I'm becoming the thing that knocks. Or maybe I always was. Maybe that's what the route is, a circuit that creates itself. Rookie drivers answering knocks until they become the knockers, approaching other trucks in impossible ways, moving through spaces that shouldn't exist. The door alarm sits on my dashboard now. It never goes off, even though it's not connected to anything. Sometimes I catch it blinking in sequences that match the knock pattern. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. The only truth that matters is the pattern, and the route, and the absolute certainty that somewhere out there, maybe at that unmarked truck stop in the desert, I'll finally understand what opened when I accidentally knocked back. 3 soft, 2 heavy, pause, forever. Story 15. The morning light filtered through her bedroom curtains like watered-down milk, pale and somehow wrong. I'd been awake for 20 minutes, watching dust motes drift in that sickly illumination, when my girlfriend shifted beside me and mumbled something about the man on the curb. Her voice carried that drowsy quality of someone speaking from the edge of a dream, but what she said made my skin prickle. He'd been there for the past 4 mornings, just sitting on the curb across the street, staring at her building. I pulled myself to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain too much. The street below looked ordinary enough. Parked cars glazed with morning dew, a few pigeons pecking at something near a storm drain. No one on the curb, but there was something about the way the shadows fell between the buildings that made me feel exposed, like stepping into a room where a conversation had just stopped. 3 days later, at exactly 10:17 a.m., the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but the empty hallway. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting that made everything look like a medical photograph. The carpet showed no footprints in its worn pile. I pressed my ear against the door and heard only the building's ambient hum. Water moving through pipes, the distant drone of someone's television, the settling sounds that old structures make when they think no one's listening. My girlfriend was at work. I'd taken the week off to help her pack. She was moving to a bigger place next month. But now I stood frozen at her door, my hand on the deadbolt, unable to shake the feeling that opening it would be like breaking some essential seal. The next morning, 10:17 a.m., the doorbell again. This time I was ready, standing right behind the door when it rang. I yanked it open before the sound even finished echoing through the apartment. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, but the air held a quality of recent disturbance, like water after a stone has sunk beneath its surface. There was a smell too, something organic and sweet, like overripe fruit left in a hot car. That afternoon, I installed a video doorbell. The process took longer than it should have. My hands kept slipping on the screwdriver, and twice I dropped screws that seemed to vanish into the thin carpet. The whole time, I felt watched. Not in the general sense of being in a public hallway, but specifically observed, cataloged, memorized. The feeling followed me back inside, where it settled into the corners of rooms like cobwebs I couldn't quite see. The camera activated at 10:16 a.m. the next day. I watched the feed on my phone, my girlfriend peering over my shoulder, her breathing shallow against my neck. At first, nothing. Then movement at the edge of the frame. Deliberate, calculated. A figure approached but stopped just outside the camera's main detection zone. We could see a partial silhouette, a darkness against the hallway's beige monotony. Then an arm extended into view, holding what looked like a telescoping pointer, the kind teachers used to use. The tip pressed the doorbell button with mechanical precision. The figure never looked at the camera, not once. Even when retracting the pointer, even when stepping back, the face remained turned away with an intentionality that felt like its own kind of acknowledgement. She suggested we ignore it. Some weird prank, she said, though her voice carried no conviction. But I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I waited by the door again. 10:17 a.m. came with its electronic chime, and this time I counted. After the ring, I heard two distinct footsteps, heel toe, moving backward. Then silence. Not the normal silence of an empty hallway, but something denser, like the air had thickened. I started timing it. If no one responded, I assumed it was a he, though I couldn't say why, waited exactly 7 minutes. 420 seconds of that oppressive quiet before the footsteps returned, receding down the hallway with the same measured pace. Never faster, never slower, like a mechanism wound to a specific tension. On the 5th day, I decided to speak. Not to open the door, just to acknowledge the presence. The doorbell rang. The 2 steps backward followed, and I pressed my mouth close to the door and said clearly, "What do you want?" The silence changed quality, became anticipatory. Then, after perhaps 30 seconds, footsteps approached, but not to the door. They stopped at what sounded like the wall beside it. I heard breathing, slow and deliberate, and something else, a soft clicking, like someone typing on a phone or adjusting settings. My girlfriend's hand found mine, squeezing hard enough to hurt. We stood frozen, listening to those small, purposeful sounds. Then the footsteps retreated, maintaining that same measured pace until they faded entirely. The next day brought a development that made my stomach clench. I developed a habit of checking the doorbell's footage obsessively, and I noticed something in the background of that day's recording. Barely visible at the end of the hallway, another figure stood motionless, just standing there, facing our direction but too far away to make out features. It appeared in the frame about 30 seconds before our visitor arrived and remained for the full 7 minutes, never moving, never shifting weight, just watching. My girlfriend didn't want to talk about it anymore. She'd started spending more time at work, coming home later, going to bed earlier. When I tried to bring it up, she'd change the subject or simply walk into another room, but I could see it in her eyes. That creeping recognition that something had shifted in the fabric of our normal life, like a picture hanging slightly askew that you can't quite straighten. A week passed. The routine had become sickeningly familiar. 10:17 a.m., doorbell, 2 steps back, 7 minutes of waiting. I'd stopped responding entirely, hoping it would end, but the persistence was mechanical, inevitable. The second figure appeared in every recording now, always in the same spot, always perfectly still. Then came the afternoon I broke the pattern. My girlfriend was in the shower. I was packing dishes, wrapping them in newspaper, when I heard movement in the hallway. Not at 10:17, it was past 3 p.m. The footsteps were different too, shuffling rather than measured. They stopped directly outside our door. I crept to the peephole and looked out. A maintenance worker stood there, tool bag in hand, looking at something on his phone. Normal, completely normal. But after days of tension, my nerves were worn thin as tissue paper. When he suddenly knocked, a sharp, professional rap, I jerked back and without thinking whispered, "Already coming." The words were barely audible, meant more for myself than anyone outside. But immediately I heard a soft chime from my phone. I looked down to see a Bluetooth notification. Unknown device wants to pair with Smart Bell 2847. My blood turned to ice water. The doorbell camera was Bluetooth enabled. I'd never bothered to secure it properly, leaving it on default settings. With shaking fingers, I declined the connection and immediately went into the app to disable Bluetooth entirely. But in the connection logs, I found something that made my hands go numb. Multiple pairing attempts, all from the same unknown device, time-stamped at exactly 10:17 a.m. each day for the past week. Someone hadn't just been ringing our doorbell. They'd been trying to connect to it, to access its feed, its stored recordings, I thought about all the times my girlfriend and I had talked in the entryway, about the camera catching us coming and going, about the microphone that was always listening for motion. I confronted her that evening, showed her the logs. Her face went pale, but there was something else in her expression, a flicker of recognition that she quickly suppressed. When I asked if she knew anything about this, she shook her head, but her denial felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this moment. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every small sound made me rigid with attention. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my chest tighten, footsteps in the hallway, but not outside. They were coming from inside the apartment, slow and careful, moving from the living room toward the bedroom. But my girlfriend was beside me, breathing steadily, deeply asleep. I lay perfectly still, listening to those footsteps get closer. They stopped just outside the bedroom door. I could hear breathing. Not mine, not hers, but a third presence, patient and deliberate. The doorknob began to turn with excruciating slowness. Then my girlfriend's phone lit up on the nightstand, casting sharp shadows on the wall. A notification. Device successfully paired. She sat up instantly, fully awake, and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear, not surprise, but something like resignation mixed with pity. She reached for her phone, and I saw her thumb hover over an app I didn't recognize, its icon a simple black circle. The footsteps retreated, moving backward with that familiar heel-toe rhythm. 2 steps, then silence. My girlfriend turned to me, her face illuminated by the phone's cold light. She opened her mouth as if to explain, then closed it again. Instead, she showed me the screen. The app displayed a single line of text. Phase 1 complete. I wanted to ask what it meant, what any of this meant, but my throat had closed up. She touched my face gently, almost apologetically, and whispered something that made no sense. "You were never supposed to answer." The next morning I woke alone. Her things were gone. Clothes, toiletries, even the dishes I'd been packing. The apartment felt larger, emptier, like rooms I'd known had doubled in size overnight. The doorbell camera showed nothing unusual in its overnight recordings, but when I checked the timestamp, Every file from the past 2 weeks had been modified at exactly 10:17 a.m. I still live here. I had to. The lease is in my name, and I can't afford to break it. But every morning at 10:17, I hear footsteps in the hallway. Not outside anymore. They're always inside now, moving through rooms I'm not in, stopping just out of sight. 2 steps forward, then backward, maintaining that perfect rhythm. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, figures standing in doorways that are empty when I turn to look. The Bluetooth on my phone constantly shows connection attempts from devices I don't recognize. And occasionally, late at night, I hear that soft clicking sound, like someone adjusting settings on something I can't see. I've stopped trying to understand it. The human mind isn't equipped to process certain patterns, certain intrusions into the orderly world we've constructed. All I know is that somewhere, in some app I'll never find, on some network I'll never access, my life is being recorded, cataloged, observed, and every morning at 10:17, something watches me pretend not to notice. The worst part isn't the fear anymore. It's the growing certainty that this was always the plan, that my girlfriend, the man on the curb, the figure at the end of the hall, were all part of something vast and patient and impossibly organized, something that needed me to speak, just once, to complete whatever circuit they were building. I've started seeing them everywhere now. People who stand too still, who move with that same measured pace, who never quite look directly at anything. They're at the grocery store, the gas station, passing by my window at exact intervals. Or maybe they were always there, and I'm only now tuned to the right frequency to notice. My phone buzzes constantly with pairing requests. I've stopped declining them. What's the point? They're already inside, already watching, already recording. Sometimes I wonder if I'm even still in my apartment, or if this is just another recording, another loop, another phase in whatever incomprehensible process I've become part of. But every morning at 10:17, I stand by the door and listen, because deep down, in some primitive part of my brain that still believes in cause and effect, I'm waiting for the day when the pattern changes, when instead of 2 steps backward, I hear 2 steps forward. When whatever's been watching finally decides it's time to come in. Story 16. On the first time I noticed something wrong at Halleck Barracks, I dismissed it as exhaustion. 3 months into cataloging the remnants of Fort Ridgeway Military Academy, and the monotony had started playing tricks with my mind, or so I told myself. The academy had been shuttered since 2019, victim to budget cuts and shifting priorities. Now it waited for auction, its buildings slowly surrendering to decay, while I documented every medal, photograph, and piece of forgotten equipment for the General Services Administration. The work was solitary, methodical, and usually peaceful, until Halleck. The barracks stood at the compound's eastern edge, a 3-story brick structure that had housed cadets since 1952. Power had been cut 2 years ago, leaving me to work by flashlight and battery-powered lanterns. The building exhaled that particular staleness of abandoned institutions, dust, old paper, and something else I couldn't quite name, like sweat that had soaked into the walls themselves. I'd been avoiding the 3rd floor, not consciously at first, but after 2 weeks, I realized I'd inventoried everything below while finding excuses to postpone the upper level. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step releasing a puff of disturbed dust that danced in my flashlight beam. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with metal lockers that had once held the possessions of young men training for wars they'd never fight. My lux meter, a device I used to assess lighting conditions for photography, rested in my jacket pocket. Standard equipment for documentation work, though useless in a building without electricity. Or it should have been. At 3:03 a.m., I was organizing files in the 2nd floor common room when I heard it. A soft metallic tinkling from above, like padlocks swaying against locker doors. The sound had rhythm, almost musical, as if someone were running their hand along the row of locks as they walked. I climbed the stairs, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The corridor was empty, silent now except for my breathing, but my lux meter was glowing. The digital display showed a spike. Not much, just enough to register. Cold light, the kind fluorescents throw when they're dying. Except there were no working lights here. The readings peaked near the lockers, then faded. I followed the trail, watching the numbers rise and fall like tracking a ghost through electromagnetic fields. They led to a door at the corridor's end, sealed with yellowed tape that read, "Maintenance access, authorized personnel only." The tape was dated October 1986. I made a note and returned to my inventory. But the next night, at 3:03 a.m. exactly, the tinkling came again. This time I was ready with my camera. The photographs showed nothing unusual, just empty hallways and shadows. But when I checked the digital access logs the Academy had installed in 2005, before reverting to manual locks, I found something that made my skin crawl. Card swipe recorded, Level 3 access granted. ID, Mitchell, TR, Exp, 10/15/1986. The timestamp was current, 3 hours ago. I searched the personnel records. Private First Class Thomas Mitchell had been enrolled at Fort Ridgeway from 1984 to 1986. Honorable discharge, no disciplinary actions. Nothing remarkable except that his file ended abruptly mid-October, with several pages appearing to have been removed. The phenomena escalated. Each night at 3:03 a.m., the lux meter would spike, the locks would rattle in sequence, and that impossible card swipe would register. I started staying later, positioning myself in different spots along the corridor, trying to document whatever was happening. The building seemed to respond to my presence. Shadows stretched longer, the air grew thicker, and I began noticing details I'd overlooked. Shoulder marks on the walls, at uniform height, as if countless bodies had brushed against the peeling paint while marching in formation. They formed a path, and when I followed it, they led to that sealed door. Fresh condensation clouded the small window from the inside, though the room beyond should have been as cold and dry as the rest of the building. In the moisture, someone had traced OK with 2 fingers. I told myself it was vandals, urban explorers who'd found a way in. But the building was secure. I checked every entrance each night. The only access was through the main door, which I locked behind me. And those card swipes, always the same expired ID, always at 3:03 a.m. Research became obsession. I dug through Academy archives, newspaper clippings, anything that might explain what happened in October 1986. The official records were sanitized, but I found references in the margins. A training exercise gone wrong, an investigation that was suddenly closed, transfers that happened too quickly to be routine. The shoulder marks on the walls grew more pronounced, not darker, but somehow more present, as if the pressure that created them was still being applied. Following them became a nightly ritual. They always ended at that door, and each time, the condensation was fresh, the OK signal clear. I started hearing footsteps during my inventories, not the random creaking of an old building, but measured, synchronized steps. Military precision. They'd fade when I turned toward them, but my peripheral vision caught movement. Shadows standing at attention, dissipating when observed directly. My dreams filled with morning formations, though I'd never served. I'd wake at 2:45 a.m. exactly, compelled to drive to Halleck. The building felt expectant when I arrived, like it was waiting for something specific. The air itself seemed to thicken as 3:03 approached. One night I brought bolt cutters. The padlocks along the lockers began their metallic song right on schedule. The lux meter flared to life, casting green light across my hands. The shoulder marks seemed to pulse, and I followed them to the sealed door. The condensation was heavier than usual, droplets running down like tears. The OK sign looked fresh, urgent. I cut through the old tape and tried the handle. Locked, but the wood around the deadbolt was rotted. 3 hits with my shoulder and it gave way. I stumbled into the room, flashlight swinging wildly. Rows of bunks, perfectly made. Footlockers at attention. And on the wall, a duty roster board with papers that should have yellowed decades ago, but looked freshly printed. The header read, Morning Formation, October 16th, 1986. But that date had never come for these cadets. October 15th was the last entry in Mitchell's file, the expiration date on his access card. Something had happened that night, something that had been scrubbed from official records but not from the building's memory. I approached the roster board. The names were listed alphabetically, check marks beside each one for October 14th, October 15th, and then October 16th, where the checks stopped mid-list, except for one name at the bottom, added in different ink, my surname. With today's date, already checked off. The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded as frost spread across the windows from the inside. The lux meter's display scrambled, numbers climbing beyond its maximum range before going dark. In that darkness, I heard them, dozens of feet moving in unison, falling into formation. My flashlight flickered back on, revealing shadows in the shape of young men, standing in perfect rows between the bunks. They faced the roster board, waiting. And I understood with terrible clarity that I was expected to complete something that had been interrupted 37 years ago. The morning formation that never ended. I ran, crashed through the doorway, down the corridor where the shoulder marks now seemed to writhe and pulse. The footsteps followed, not chasing, but marching, maintaining formation even in pursuit. The locks rattled not randomly, but in sequence, like a countdown. I made it to my car, hands shaking too badly to get the key in the ignition. In the rearview mirror, Halleck Barracks stood dark except for the third floor, where a cold light pulsed behind every window. Shadows moved in formation behind the glass. I didn't return the next night, or the next, but at 2:45 a.m., I wake, every single morning. The compulsion is getting stronger, the need to complete that roster, to check off those names, to finish what was started in 1986. I've researched obsessively since then, found fragments, a hazing incident that went too far, a training officer who insisted on completing morning formation despite a gas leak in the barracks, cadets who couldn't break formation, wouldn't break formation, even as they... But the records stopped there. Redacted, destroyed, forgotten, except by the building. Last night I found my old employee access card had changed. The photo is still mine, but the text now reads, Mitchell T.R., exp. 10/15/1986. The same ID that's been swiping in every night at 3:03 a.m. I've started seeing the shoulder marks on walls outside Halleck, in my apartment hallway, at the grocery store, always at the same height, always leading back toward Fort Ridgeway. The formation is expanding, or I'm being pulled into it. This morning, I found military dress shoes in my closet that I've never owned. They're polished to a perfect shine and fit exactly. There's a name tape in the heel. Mitchell. I know what's happening. Or I think I do. Or I'm losing my mind. The distinction matters less each day. What matters is that tonight, at 3:03 a.m., there will be a formation at Halleck Barracks. There's always a formation. It never ended, just paused, waiting for someone to complete the roll call. The roster is in my apartment now. I didn't bring it here. It simply appeared on my kitchen table this afternoon. 37 names, all checked off except for Mitchell, T.R., and below that, in my own handwriting that I don't remember writing, my name. Today's date, already checked off. I can feel them waiting, standing at attention in that room that shouldn't exist, in a formation that should have ended decades ago. The sun is setting, and my hands won't stop shaking. The dress shoes are by my door, polished and ready. The compulsion is overwhelming now, not to run, but to report, to fall in, to complete what was started, because maybe that's what I've been all along. Not a cataloger of abandoned things, but something abandoned myself. Something that's been waiting in formation since 1986, going through the motions of a life while my name waited on that roster. At 2:45 a.m., I'll wake. I always wake. At 3:00 a.m., I'll drive to Fort Ridgeway. I always drive. At 3:03 a.m., I'll stand in formation. We always stand in formation. The roll call must be completed. It was never about documenting the past. It was about joining it.